Chapter 1859. What are you talking about? You motherf***, are you a scholar again? Cheng Yaojin glared and slapped Ma Zhou's face. As he slapped him, he said unhappily, Lao Tzu asked you to stay here. Hurry up and say it. Stop hitting me. I'll say it. Hao Chujun looked at Ma Zhou, who was being abused. He couldn't bear it because he wasn't sure if he would be the next one. It was better to say it earlier. However, he couldn't say everything. He decided to leave out half of it. You want to say it? Cheng Yaojin glanced at Hao Chujun and was delighted. Then, he looked at Ma Zhou and put down his half-swollen face. See, you should have said it earlier. You just like to be abused. After he said that, he looked at Hao Chujun and smiled. Hurry up and say it. Lao Tzu doesn't wait for anyone. Hao Chujun glanced at Ma Zhou, who wanted to cry but had no tears. He seemed to have made up his mind and said, We only know that our teacher has been researching something that can fly into the sky. These few days, Tang and the others have been helping our teacher. Then he disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. We don't dare to ask about our teacher. After he said that, he glanced at Ma Zhou as if to say, Look, what did I say? Ma Zhou gave him a look of disdain. Something that can fly into the sky? Cheng Yaojin raised his head and glanced at the sky. He was a little confused. What could fly into the sky? Was this a king dream? He didn't believe it. He turned and stared at Hao Chujun. Are you king lying to Lao Tzu? What can fly into the sky? Unless it's that jinx. How would we dare to lie to you? Look, Ma Zhou has been beaten up to this state. I wouldn't dare to lie to you even if I had 8 guts. Hao Chujun looked troubled. He said it as if he was more wrong than Ma Zhou. Cheng Yaojin nodded. He also believed that this guy wouldn't dare to lie to him. However, this was a little unbelievable. Something that could fly into the sky? What kind of king genius could do this? However, the jinx in the sky was also something that could fly into the sky. It was hard to say. A jinx. Could the thing that Feng Zi created be related to the thing in the sky? If this was true, then it would be terrible. Right now, the entire country thought that it was the vengeful spirit of the Black Marital School. If Feng Zi and Tainyo were up there, would they be in any danger? Thinking of this, he was a little uneasy. He turned around and walked towards the entrance of the research institute. He had to go back and report to Her Majesty about such an important matter. Don't go. Untie us. Wait. Hao Chujun and Ma Zhou's screams came from behind him, but it did not affect his determination to return to the palace. Cheng Yaojin quickly walked out of the research institute, jumped onto the back of a horse, and galloped in the direction of the palace. Now that his son was in danger, all the more he couldn't slack off. If the two of them fell from the sky, then the Cheng family's bloodline would end. With that thought in mind, he whipped his horse and arrived at the palace in no time. Within the imperial study, Li Shimin was sitting on the dragon throne, thinking about what to do next. Now that the commoners had been pacified, the punishment had already been announced, and it would probably cause another storm. What should he do then? This was giving him a headache. Just as he was worrying, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door. Your Majesty, something has happened. Cheng Yaojin began to shout as soon as he stepped into the imperial study. What happened? Li Shimin slowly raised his head, looking listless. For him, there was nothing worse now. After all, he had already prepared to announce his punishment. Could there be anything worse than this? The thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi. Cheng Yaojin quickly stepped forward with a face full of impatience. What? Li Shimin suddenly stood up and widened his eyes. What did you just say? Say it again? Your Majesty, the thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi. He is now in the sky, and even my son is there. Cheng Yaojin looked embarrassed and said in a wronged tone. What the hell is going on? Li Shimin frowned, his hands trembling. How did you know? He still found it hard to believe because he didn't dare to believe that people could go up to the sky, and more than one person. He also didn't know why Feng Zi made this thing. Your Majesty, I heard it from his disciple. It is all true. Cheng Yaojin had a long face, as if something had happened to his son. He had always treated his son like a treasure, and now that something like this had happened, he was actually more anxious than anyone else. How could this be? What does Feng Zi want to do? Li Shimin seemed to have lost all his strength as he sat on the dragon throne. He had always thought that the thing in the sky was the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate, but now he was being told that it was man-made? He really couldn't accept it. Moreover, the punishment had been announced, the water and land assembly, and the sacrificial ceremony had already begun. To say this now was simply a blow. These things had already begun to be prepared, and it was impossible to take them back. If he had known about this earlier, he might have had a chance to salvage everything. Now, there was no chance at all. Chapter 1860. But there were both good and bad things. Since there were no vengeful spirits in the sky, he was no longer so worried. He let out a long sigh and glanced at Qing Yaojin. Do you know what Feng Zi wants to do with all this? Your Majesty, this lowly subject also does not know. I only heard from his disciple that he wants to do some research. Qing Yaojin spread out his hands. He was also very helpless. Not only had his son been kidnapped, he had also worked for nothing. Since you don't know, then forget it. Li Shimin helplessly replied. Then he seemed to think of something and hurriedly said, immediately send someone to find Yu Qigong and see where Feng Zi is preparing to go. Also, inform Li Jing and have him lead an army to investigate. Yes, Your Majesty. Qing Yaojin nodded and walked out the door. He needed to find Feng Zi's tracks as quickly as possible. Even if His Majesty had not given the order, he still needed to do this. This was both for Feng Zi and for his son. The palace did not stop him, so he quickly walked out of Vermilion Bird Gate. Leaping onto his horse, he charged toward the Duke of the estate. Out of the way! Everyone in front, out of the way! Qing Yaojin waved the whip in his hand as he constantly shouted. When the people on the street saw the large horse charging over, they hurriedly got out of the way. They were all commoners, so they did not dare to bump into the horse of an official. A few moments later, Qing Yaojin arrived at the Duke of the estate. Leaping off his horse, he walked toward the estate. The guards at the gate basically all recognized him and did not dare to stop him. Qing Yaojin arrived at the empty hall and began to shout, Big old black, big old black. Who is it? Who dares to curse Lao Tzu? Yu Qigong walked out of the side hall, his eyes wide open. When he saw that it was Qing Yaojin, his eyes widened even more. Old Cheng, is your King's skin itching for a beating? Instead of staying at home, you've come to my place to make a fuss. Are you seeking death? Big old black, I don't have time to joke with you. Qing Yaojin hurriedly stepped forward and said with a serious face, the thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi. Now His Majesty wants us to find him. Hurry up and bring the troops and horses with me. With that, he grabbed Yu Qigong and was about to pull him out of the door. Wait a moment. Yu Qigong shook off Qing Yaojin and asked in surprise, what did you just say? That thing in the sky was made by Feng Zi? Are you King still asleep? He found it hard to believe that humans could ascend to the heavens. Wasn't he just bragging? Moreover, this old man often made all kinds of jokes with him. 9 out of 10 of his words could not be trusted. Lao Tzu didn't lie to you. Qing Yaojin pulled a long face and said with a serious face, Big old black, Lao Tzu knows that you don't want to believe it, but this is the truth. His Majesty has already ordered us to find Feng Zi with Li Jing. Yu Qigong looked at Qing Yaojin's expression. It didn't seem to be fake, but he still had doubts in his heart. Humans ascended to the heavens? This was a little too unbelievable. If you want Lao Tzu to go with you, then swear an oath first. He put his hands on his hips and smiled maliciously. This old man was used to lying. If he was willing to swear, then it was true. You bastard! Qing Yaojin cursed silently and rolled his eyes at Yu Qigong. However, he still swore unwillingly. Lao Tzu swears here that if I lie to big old black, then I will have no descendants. You're even willing to swear such a vicious oath. Yu Qigong's eyes widened. Now he believed that the other party was telling the truth. If he was willing to swear such a vicious oath, it meant that the matter was very serious. Okay, Lao Tzu will go with you. Then he pulled Qing Yaojin out of the door. As he walked, he said, But tell me what happened first. Humans ascended to the heavens? This is a little too unbelievable. Don't rush. We'll talk as we walk. Cheng Yaojin and Yu Qigong quickly walked out of the door. But we have to find Li Jing first. His Majesty has something to tell him. Then, the two mounted their horses one after the other and galloped towards Li Jing's residence. Old Cheng, what's going on? Tell me in detail. Yu Qigong couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked. Didn't Feng Zi go missing in the beginning? Cheng Yaojin pulled on the reins and looked at Yu Qigong. His Majesty told me to find this kid, so I went to White Deer College. Speaking of this, his emotions suddenly surged and he said excitedly, in the end, I met that old guy Yu Shernan. Originally, Lao Tzu was kind and polite. He wanted to ask about Feng Zi's whereabouts, but that old guy came up and scolded him. If it weren't for Lao Tzu's age, he would have beaten him up on the spot. Then you didn't beat him up, right? Yu Qigong asked subconsciously. He knew of Yu Shernan's influence. Not many people in the imperial court dared to offend him. If old Cheng dared to beat up Yu Shernan, a lawsuit would be enough to make him suffer. Is Lao Tzu that kind of person? Cheng Yaojin pursed his lips, clearly unconvinced. He thought to himself, how could I, old Cheng, do something like digging my own grave? However, his mouth was still unforgiving. Although that old guy said a few words to Lao Tzu, I'm not the kind of person who would casually beat people up. Chapter 1861. Yu Qigong's mouth twitched as if to say, aren't you the kind of person who beats people up? How many people have you beaten up? However, he didn't want to argue with him, so he continued to ask, what happened after that? How did Feng Zi get into the sky? After that, Cheng Yaojin glanced in the direction of Shao Mountain, and a smug look flashed across his eyes. I met a student from the academy, and he told me that Feng Zi went to the research institute. Lao Tzu went all the way to the research institute to take a look. Guess what? What? You saw Feng Zi fly into the sky? Yu Qigong widened his eyes and looked at Cheng Yaojin curiously. That's not it. Cheng Yaojin smiled awkwardly, but he quickly covered it up and smiled. Lao Tzu saw Feng Zi's two students fiddling with the things in the sky. Damn, Lao Tzu thought you were going to say something. Yu Qigong waved his hand disdainfully. He thought there would be some good news, but this guy was talking nonsense. Why are you in such a hurry? Let's listen to Lao Tzu first. Cheng Yaojin rolled his eyes at Yu Qigong and said angrily, at first, those two students didn't want to say where Feng Zi went. Lao Tzu saw that they were acting weird, so he taught them a lesson. Only then did those two guys say that Feng Zi was researching flying things. How was it? Lao Tzu did well, right? He raised his eyebrows and looked proud as if to say, look at how good Lao Tzu is. However, Yu Qigong ignored all of this and sneered. How was it? How embarrassing. You beat up two weak students, and you still have the nerve to show off in front of Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu was trying to find out where Feng Zi was. Cheng Yaojin widened his eyes and looked unconvinced. Lao Tzu's Tainyo and Feng Zi disappeared together. How can Lao Tzu not be worried? Iron Bull is gone too. Yu Qigong frowned as a bad premonition struck him. Yeah, it's not just Tainyo. There's also Zhangsun Wuji's kid and Old Man Du's kid. Cheng Yaojin added. So many people have disappeared? Yu Qigong muttered to himself. He didn't expect so many people to disappear. It seemed like things weren't as simple as they seemed. With that, he whipped his horse and galloped forward. A hurried voice came from the original spot. Old Cheng, run faster. Wait for me, Big Blackie. Cheng Yaojin urged the horse's belly and hurriedly followed. The two of them dashed through the streets and soon arrived at Li Jing's residence. Yu Qigong dismounted from his horse and rushed straight into the mansion. Behind him, he could hear Cheng Yaojin's shouts. Big Blackie, wait for Lao Tzu. However, Yu Qigong acted as if he didn't hear him. He walked wholeheartedly towards Li Jing's residence. As soon as he entered, he began to shout, Medicine Master Li, where did he die? Just as he finished speaking, Cheng Yaojin stumbled in, panting. Big Blackie, don't you know how to King wait for Lao Tzu? Why should I wait for you? Yu Qigong rolled his eyes at Cheng Yaojin and said in a bad mood, look at you. All you do is drink all day. You ride a horse like a woman who just gave birth. You're so weak. Lao Tzu, Qing Yaojin was unconvinced. Just as he was about to scold him, a figure walked over. Upon closer inspection, he saw that it was Li Jing. He had no choice but to suppress his anger. He threw Yu Qigong aside and walked towards Li Jing. Medicine Master, we've been looking for you for a long time. Come with us. There's something important. With that, he grabbed Li Jing's right hand and prepared to leave. Thinking of this, Li Jing threw him aside and said unhappily, "If you have something to say, say it. Don't drag me around." He didn't have a good impression of the two in front of him. They were both big and burly. The moment they came in, they shouted. If they weren't officials of the same court, he would have thrown them out. Hee. Cheng Yaojin smiled awkwardly. He wanted to get angry, but when he thought of His Majesty's decree, he suppressed his anger. He rubbed his wrist and said, "Medicine Master, His Majesty just ordered you to track Feng Zi. That's why we came to find you. We'll move together." Why track Feng Zi? Isn't he at White Deer College? Li Jing didn't doubt Qing Yaojin's words. He knew that although Qing Yaojin was bold, he wouldn't dare to fake an imperial decree. However, he didn't understand. Why track Zhang Feng? Was His Majesty going to put Zhang Feng under house arrest? Was that why he wanted him to track him? You still don't know, right? Feng Zi is missing. Qing Yaojin looked at Li Jing. He thought that Li Jing knew, but it seemed like that wasn't the case. What? Feng Zi is missing? Li Jing was shocked. He grabbed Qing Yaojin and asked anxiously, "What is going on?" "Don't be anxious. Listen to me first." Qing Yaojin pushed Li Jing's right hand away and said solemnly, "I just received the news today. His Majesty told me that Feng Zi was missing. Later on, I went to look for him and found out that the thing in the sky was created by Feng Zi. Later on, His Majesty asked you and Big Black to track down Feng Zi's traces, which is the thing in the sky." You're saying that the thing in the sky was created by Feng Zi? Chapter 1862. Lord Li Jing's eyes widened in disbelief. That's right, and he's already in the sky. Cheng Yaojin nodded and looked at the sky. Even my iron bull has gone up. Why are you only telling me such an important thing now? Lord Li Jing frowned, clearly unhappy. With that, he glanced at the sky and turned to walk out of the residence. Let's go. Follow me to the barracks to gather the troops. Oh, I'm coming. Cheng Yaojin pulled Yu Qigong and quickly followed. The three of them hurriedly walked out of the door and rode their horses to the barracks. Since they were tracking that thing in the sky, the more people there were, the better. With one more person, they would have one more pair of eyes and one more strength. The three generals who led troops to war knew this very well. After rushing all the way, the three of them finally arrived at the barracks. They hurriedly gathered 20,000 troops and left the barracks. Yaojin, in my opinion, we should split up. Lord Li Jing glanced at the blurry hot air balloon in the sky and said solemnly. The hot air balloon was drifting further and further away, and it was easy to get lost if they followed it together. The best way was to split up. Moreover, this fellow was a veteran commander, so there was no problem with this. All right, I'll go with Big Black. You go alone. Is that okay? Cheng Yaojin nodded and immediately agreed with Lord Li Jing's opinion. As a veteran commander, he naturally had such strategic foresight. All right, then I'll go first. Lord Li Jing nodded and then looked at the soldiers behind him. He shouted, 10,000 men come with me. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his horsewhip and rushed forward. The soldiers behind him followed closely behind, raising a cloud of dust. Looking at the gradually disappearing figures, Yu Qigong looked at Cheng Yaojin and said solemnly, Old Sheng, let's go too. All right, let's go. Cheng Yaojin nodded. With that, he pulled the horse's head and shouted, Everyone follow me. The soldiers immediately opened up a path in the middle. Cheng Yaojin whipped his horse and galloped off. Yu Qigong followed closely behind. Seeing that the two commanders had already set off, the soldiers followed behind. Although the hot air balloon had drifted far away, its speed was not very fast. Occasionally, one could still see the shadow of the hot air balloon. Looking at the image, Cheng Yaojin and Yu Qigong led their troops and charged towards the hot air balloon. They did not dare to be negligent. This was not only because of His Majesty's imperial edict, but also because of some personal reasons. Both of them were on good terms with Zhang Feng, especially Yu Qigong. His cousin even had some sort of entanglement with Zhang Feng. If something happened to Zhang Feng in the sky, what would happen to his cousin? On the other hand, Cheng Yaojin was just as worried as Yu Qigong. This was because his son was currently in the sky with Zhang Feng. If his son was in any danger, what would happen to the Cheng family? Wouldn't that be the end of their line? Thinking of this, he felt as if a needle had pierced his heart. It was an abnormal feeling. Everyone speed up. Cheng Yaojin glanced back and shouted. With that, he waved his horse whip and sped up. Old Cheng, wait for me. Yu Qigong was not to be outdone. He waved his horse whip and followed. He naturally knew that old Cheng was worried about his son, so he did not dissuade him. Instead, he directly followed. The two of them hurried on without stopping. Dust rose behind them, and the sound of the soldiers' footsteps could be heard behind them. After running for an unknown period of time, they finally saw the shadow of the hot air balloon. Whoosh! Yu Qigong reined in his horse and glanced at the hot air balloon in the sky. Then he looked at the guard beside him and said, "Bring me the map." Big Black, why aren't you continuing to chase? Cheng Yaojin also stopped and looked at Yu Qigong beside him. He was a little puzzled. After all, they had just seen a shadow and it was still far away. Why was this guy still stopping here? Wait a minute. We've been running for so long. Even if the people aren't tired, the horses still need to rest. Yu Qigong looked at Cheng Yaojin with a serious expression. After that, he did not wait for the other party to reply. He took the map from the guard and looked at it seriously. A moment later, he frowned and handed the map in his hand to Cheng Yaojin. Old Cheng looked. We've left Cheng. Left Cheng? Cheng Yaojin took the map with a puzzled expression and glanced at it roughly. As expected, it's just that Feng Zi is still floating ahead. Look in the direction Feng Zi is floating in. That's it? Yu Qigong pointed in the direction of the hot air balloon with a solemn expression. Cheng Yaojin looked in the direction Yu Qigong was pointing in. At first, he did not notice it. After looking for a while, he suddenly felt that something was wrong and exclaimed, "That's the direction of Xianxia?" That's right. I looked at the map just now. Feng Zi is going in the direction of Xianxia. Yu Qigong took a deep breath and furrowed his brows as if he was worried about something. If it's really in the direction of Xianxia, then we're in trouble. There are 200,000 Xiongnu soldiers stationed there. Cheng Yaojin looked ahead and widened his eyes. He had been to Xianxia with Big Black before. Not only was it barren, but there were also Xiongnu soldiers stationed there. If Feng Zi and Tainyo went there, it would be very dangerous. Chapter 1863. Thinking of this, he couldn't wait any longer. He said impatiently, "We can't rest anymore. We have to go to Xianxia immediately and save them." With that, he prepared to whip his horse and gallop in the direction of Xianxia. Unexpectedly, Yu Qigong pulled him back. "Big Old Black, what the hell are you doing? Lao Tzu is going to save Tainyo." Cheng Yaojin turned to look at Yu Qigong, the veins on his forehead bulging. This matter must be reported to His Majesty. After all, His Majesty has given a decree before. Yu Qigong didn't get angry. Instead, he spoke unhurriedly because he knew how old Cheng felt. His son was missing. Now that he had finally received some news, how could he not be anxious? However, he couldn't be impulsive at this time. Cheng Yaojin panted heavily, trying to suppress the anger in his heart. However, on second thought, Big Old Black was right. This was His Majesty's decree. Now that he had received the news, he had to report it. After a pause, he said, "All right then. Quickly send someone back to the palace to report to His Majesty. Don't waste Lao Tzu's time." Yu Qigong nodded. He glanced at the guard leading the horse and said, "Look, give me the reins. Then, pick a horse from behind. Take my token and enter the palace to meet His Majesty. Tell His Majesty everything that has happened here without leaving out a single word." After he finished speaking, he took out a military order from his waist and tossed it to Lution. This military order was a symbol of status. As long as one had this military order, they could enter the palace at will and would not be stopped. It was the most suitable thing for a messenger. Yes, General. Lu Tian cupped his hands and handed the reins to Yu Qigong. Then, he turned and walked away. Seeing that everything had been settled, Qing Yaojin hurriedly said, "Can we go now?" He was already very anxious. He knew that if he went a moment later, his son would be in more danger. He didn't dare to take such a risk. "Let's go." Yu Qigong nodded. He waved the horsewhip in his hand and galloped forward. Cheng Yaojin also hurriedly followed, galloping in the mountain road. At the side, Letian also obtained a horse. He immediately turned it around and galloped in the direction of Cheng. He was only a guard, so he did not know much about these matters. However, he could tell the severity of the situation from the general's expression. Therefore, he did not dare to be negligent. With a wave of his whip, he left in a cloud of dust. In less than a moment, he arrived at Chang and city. As soon as he entered the city, waves of wailing could be heard incessantly. It was as ear-piercing as the screams of vengeful spirits in hell. Soon, the tragic scenes of Chang and city appeared in front of his eyes. People covered in blood were sitting everywhere on the streets. There were women, children, and even old people. They sat on the steps and kept murmuring something. When he got closer to listen, he found that they were all about vengeful spirits, evil spirits, and so on. There were also many soldiers patrolling the streets. They carried stretchers and carried the injured to the side. The doctors saw this and immediately went forward to treat them. Although Letian sympathized with all this, he knew that he had a more important mission. He chose to turn a blind eye to it and ran toward the city gate. The gate of Chang and city was not very far away. Lutian arrived in a few breaths. However, at this time, the gate of Chang and city was closed. The gate was full of guards, each of them holding a spear and looking serious. Guards of Chang, and open the gate immediately. I have important military information to report to the emperor. Letian took out the token at his waist and shouted with his head held high. With his status, he would definitely not be able to persuade these guards. The most effective way was to take out the token. This was the direct reason why the general gave him the token. When the guards saw the token in Lutian's hand, their expressions changed drastically. They thought that some great general had come. They bowed together and said, "General, please." After that, the leader of the guards gave the crowd at the gate a look. The latter immediately understood and opened the gate. Seeing this, Letian spurred his horse and left. After galloping all the way, Letian finally arrived at the gate of the palace. With the experience at the gate of Chang and city, he took the initiative to take out the token. The guard hesitated for a moment but still chose to let him in. This was because people who could hold such a token usually had important information. They did not dare to stop him privately. There were no obstructions at the gate. Lutian was led to the imperial study by the guard. At this time, two strong men were standing at the gate of the imperial study. They were Li Shimon's personal eunuchs. Little Gizi was serving Li Shimon inside, so they needed to serve him outside. "Strong men, I have urgent military information to report to His Majesty. Can you let me in?" Lu Tian bowed and smiled at the two strong men. In the palace, he had to be careful. Who knew what kind of people were in front of him? They might be able to kill him with a slap, so it was better to be careful. When the two heard the sound, they turned their heads and glanced at him with a trace of disdain. They seemed to be sizing him up. After a while, one of them slowly said, "Do you have proof?" "Yes, yes, yes." Lutian quickly replied. Then, he took out the token at his waist and handed it over. "This is General Yuchi's token. He ordered me to see His Majesty." Chapter 1864. The strong man took the token and looked at it as if he was looking for something. After a while, he seemed to have confirmed something and put the token into his sleeve. He then looked at Letian. However, the disdain in his eyes lessened. "Wait here. I'll report to His Majesty." With that, the strong man turned and walked towards the imperial study without waiting for Letian's reply. In less than half an hour, the strong man walked out again. He glanced at Letian and said calmly, "Go in. Be careful not to say anything." "Thank you, strongman." Letian cupped his hands and walked towards the imperial study. As soon as he entered, he felt an oppressive atmosphere that made it hard for him to breathe. At this moment, a hoarse duck's voice was heard. "Halt! Why don't you bow when you see His Majesty?" Lutian was startled and subconsciously looked up. He saw a man in a dragon robe sitting on the dragon throne. However, this person did not look too good, as if he had not slept for a few days. He shook his head and threw away the distracting thoughts in his mind. When he realized that the person in front of him was His Majesty, he quickly bowed. "Greetings, Your Majesty. General Yuchi ordered me to report the military situation. Please forgive me for my rudeness." Lutian lowered his head tightly and said in a trembling voice. He did not bow immediately, which was a little rude. However, Li Shimin was not in the mood to care about this. He slowly raised his head and said tiredly, "What military situation did Yuchi Gong ask you to report?" Hearing that His Majesty did not care about his rudeness, Lutian was delighted and blurted out, "Your Majesty, General Yuchi and General Cheng followed Your Majesty's imperial edict to track that thing in the sky. They have been rushing all the way and have already left Chang. General Yuchi has a premonition that the thing in the sky is heading towards Xingzhou." "What?" Li Shimin stood up from the dragon throne and widened his eyes. "What did you just say? Say it again?" "Your Majesty, please forgive me." Lutian suddenly knelt on the ground. His face was a little pale. He did not know why His Majesty suddenly became angry, nor did he know that he had said something wrong to make His Majesty so angry. If he really angered His Majesty, he would not be able to leave the imperial study today. He was very worried. "I asked you to say it again. Did you not hear me?" Li Shimin's eyes were bloodshot, and he looked a little ferocious. "Your Majesty." Lutian's legs trembled incessantly. His forehead was already dripping with cold sweat. He crawled on the ground tightly, not daring to raise his head at all. "General Yuchi has a premonition that the thing in the sky is going to float in the direction of Sheng Province. General also said that there are 200,000 Xiongnu soldiers stationed in Sheng Province. General is currently leading the troops in the direction of Sheng Province." "The direction of Xingzhou." Li Shimin put his hands on the table, his face pale. If Feng Zi and the others went to Xingzhou and fell into the hands of the Xiongnu people, they would definitely die. Thinking of this, he quickly said, "Go back and tell Yuchi Gong to protect Zhang Feng at all costs, even if it means starting a war with the Xiongnu people. Go quickly." After saying that, he covered his chest with his hand as if something was blocking his throat. Cough, cough. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Little Gizi quickly went forward and supported Li Shimin. He patted his chest and asked with concern, "Your Majesty, are you okay?" Cough, cough. Li Shimin coughed violently again. After a while, he seemed to have recovered a little. He waved his hand. "I'm fine." After saying that, he glanced at Lutian, who was kneeling on the ground. "Let this guy go quickly. Did you hear that? His Majesty wants you to go back and tell Yuchi Gong." Little Gizi supported Li Shimin with one hand and scolded Lutian. Lutian suddenly realized that he had been frightened by His Majesty and lost his mind for a moment. Now that he had recovered, he quickly said, "I'll go back and report immediately." After saying that, he quickly got up and turned to walk out of the imperial study. At the same time, on the hot air balloon, Zhang Feng and the others were huddled together as if they were hugging each other for warmth. They hugged each other tightly, their lips pale, and even their eyelashes were stained with the moisture in the air. It seemed that they were quite cold. White clouds floated past their eyes, but they were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. After an unknown period of time, Zhang Feng started to tremble from the cold. He subconsciously touched the blanket that was originally covering him, but found that it was gone. He could only open his half-closed eyes and glance to the side, only to see that the blanket had run to the three guys. This angered him. Damn it, he was still cold, and they actually dared to take the blanket away. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He could not help but curse, "Damn it, you idiots, hurry up and wake up Lao Tzu." After a round of scolding, no one moved at all. This angered Zhang Feng and he kicked them. "Idiot, wake up. Don't King pretend to be dead." Violence was indeed the most direct way to solve problems. Under Zhang Feng's torture, everyone woke up one after another. The first to wake up was Cheng Chumo. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and was somewhat puzzled. Feng Zi, I dreamed that someone kicked me. What do you think is going on? Chapter 1865. Yeah, I dreamt of it too. Not only did he kick me, but he also kept scolding me. Zhang Sun patted his butt. He also felt it deeply. Du Go spread his hands, indicating that he didn't know. He wanted to get rid of the suspicion first. Besides, he was also kicked. It was Lao Tzu who kicked me just now. Zhang Feng put his hands on his hips and glared at the crowd. Mother f***, you idiots. Lao Tzu said he was going to sleep for a while. Where did the blanket that covered his body go? Are you trying to rebel? Recently, the hot air balloon and the academy had caused him to not have a good night's sleep. Now that he finally had some time, he wanted to sleep for a while and let these guys look after the hot air balloon. They readily agreed, so he didn't care. However, when he woke up, not only were these guys lying beside him, he didn't even know where the hot air balloon had drifted to. How could he not be angry? These fellows were simply incapable of accomplishing anything but good at spoiling things. Blanket. Du Go subconsciously looked at the blanket on his body and scratched his head awkwardly. Feng Zi, we saw that you were too hot just now, so we borrowed it to cover you. Don't be angry. Borrowed? Zhang Feng opened his mouth wide in disbelief. He instantly had a new understanding of these guys. He fell asleep and took his things. This was called borrowing. Hearing these words, he was instantly furious. He pointed at the three's noses and scolded, Are you mother f*** curs shameless? Is this called borrowing? This is called stealing. Lao Tzu was sleeping well, but you took away Lao Tzu's blanket. Now you're in the right. Do you believe that Lao Tzu will immediately deflate the hot air balloon? Will he drop all of you to death? As he spoke, he held the iron wire and took out a lighter from his waist. He really did look like he was going to deflate the air. This scared the three of them. They quickly grabbed Zhang Feng's thighs and begged, Feng Zi, don't be impulsive. If you let go, we'll all go see the king of hell. Yeah, Feng Zi, isn't it just a blanket? When we get back, I'll compensate you with 10, no, 100. I'll give you as many as you want. How about that? Feng Zi, please don't do this. This is 1 corpse and 4 lives. Zhang Feng naturally wouldn't do something like digging his own grave. He only said that to scare the three of them. Now that the three of them had given in, he naturally felt greatly relieved. He deliberately coughed twice and said, Ahem, you guys are used to being dandy. You actually dared to steal from Lao Tzu. This time, I'll teach you a lesson. If you do it again, Lao Tzu will kill you. Definitely not. Feng Zi, don't worry. If it happens again, we'll jump down ourselves. Yeah, I won't. The three of them kept nodding and bowing as obedient as they could be. Seeing this, Zhang Feng proudly glanced at everyone before putting away the fire starter in his hand with satisfaction. You even gave me a blanket. Are you trying to freeze me to death? He glared at Du Go, his gaze not leaving the blanket in the other's hand. Here. Du Go hurriedly handed the blanket over, afraid that the other party would be dissatisfied and prepare to release the gas again. If that happened, they would all be wiped out. After all, he hadn't lived long enough yet. That's more like it. Zhang Feng took the blanket with satisfaction and immediately wrapped it around his body. Instantly, he felt a wave of warmth. However, Cheng Chumo and the other two felt uncomfortable. The three of them could only curl up together and shiver. There was nothing they could do. The air in the sky blew, forming waves of cold wind that were bone-chilling. The three of them hugged each other and shivered non-stop. Their lips were turning blue. Just like this, after the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, Zhang Sun, who was outside, couldn't stand it anymore. He said with a trembling voice, Tai Nyo, when you came up, didn't you bring a package? Go and see if there's anything that can keep out the cold. Yeah, I brought something when I came up. How could I forget? Look at my dog head. Cheng Chumo suddenly stood up and patted his head. He then went to rummage through the package beside him. After rummaging for a long time, he seemed to have seen something and exclaimed, Why is this thing in the hot air balloon? With this roar, everyone's attention was focused on him. What is it? Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Chumo with a puzzled face. Come and see for yourself. Cheng Chumo pulled at the package as if unwilling to say more. Trying to be mysterious. Zhang Feng secretly spat. He frowned and walked towards the package. When he glanced at it, he felt unwell. The package was filled with gunpowder. He roughly estimated that there were 10 stones. One stone was equivalent to 120 kilograms. That would be 1,200 kilograms of gunpowder. He subconsciously exclaimed, "Gunpowder? Why is there so much gunpowder in the package?" He remembered that when he went up the hot air balloon, he didn't bring any gunpowder. Why was there this thing now? If it was other things, it would be fine. However, gunpowder was very dangerous, especially in the sky. If there was any danger, there would be no way out. Moreover, there was a lot of gunpowder. If they weren't careful, everyone could be smashed to pieces. I don't know either. Cheng Chumo pulled a long face, expressing his innocence. Of course, he knew the pros and cons of this, but if it wasn't him, he would definitely not admit it. Chapter 1866. You don't know. Zhang Feng frowned, then looked at Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. If Cheng Tinyu really didn't know, then it was these two guys who did it. Tell me, did you two do it? It wasn't me. Zhang Sunchong's face changed, and he quickly waved his hand to get rid of suspicion. When we got on the hot air balloon, we followed your instructions and moved some things up. How would we dare to move this thing that could kill us? Moved some things? Zhang Feng held his chin and began to recall what happened before they got on the hot air balloon. He did ask these guys to move some sandbags to stabilize the hot air balloon, but he didn't ask them to move gunpowder. With these guys' courage, they shouldn't dare to do such a thing privately. After all, this wasn't a joke. Could it be that they accidentally moved it up? He kind of believed this because these people didn't have the courage to joke with their lives. Fortunately, he didn't smoke because he was afraid of hydrogen. Otherwise, he wouldn't know where he became fertilizer. Forget it, forget it. Since we've already moved it up, let's not bother about this. Zhang Feng waved his hand, indicating that he was letting them go. Just as he was about to turn around, he suddenly remembered something. He glanced at everyone and said with a serious face, "Now that the gunpowder is on the hot air balloon, you can't play with fire or smoke. Just in case, let me take care of the matches." After saying that, he reached out and asked for the matches from everyone. Everyone didn't hesitate and handed the matches to Zhang Feng. After all, they all knew the power of the gunpowder. If it was ignited, it would be a total annihilation. Zhang Feng put the matches in his waist and glanced at the exposed gunpowder. He said with some worry, "You guys hurry up and pick up the gunpowder. What if something happens? Lao Tzu doesn't want to die." Hearing this, the three of them didn't dare to delay. They quickly wrapped the gunpowder in 3 layers and tore it to make sure there was no problem. Only then did they stop. Zhang Feng nodded with satisfaction, then glanced down and looked back at everyone. "Do you guys know where we are?" The 3 of them were puzzled. Weren't they in Chang just now? "You don't recognize me now?" They hurriedly glanced down and looked at the high mountains and hills below. Almost in unison, they said, "This is Shung province." Their fathers were all high-ranking officials in the imperial court. Naturally, they were very familiar with the customs of the Tang dynasty. Even if they were on a hot air balloon, they could still distinguish the regions. Xing Prefecture? Zhang Feng frowned. He had a bad premonition. How did we end up in Shenzhou? I don't know either. Cheng Chumo's expression was somewhat unsightly. He said, "I heard from my father that there are Turks stationed in Xing province. There are as many as 200,000 soldiers and horses." What? Zhang Xuan's expression changed. He held onto the iron wire and asked, "Why are there Turks here? Aren't we getting closer and closer to the Turkic camp?" He knew what it meant to go to the Turkic camp. It was death. The Tang dynasty and the Turkic Empire were at war all year round. If he went there now, he would definitely become a captive. The hot air balloon soon fell into a panic. The 3 timid guys hugged each other tightly and secretly prayed that the hot air balloon would leave the Turkic camp. On the other hand, Zhang Feng held his chin as if he was thinking about something. After a while, the corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a hint of joy. He looked at everyone and said with a smile, "Don't cry. Lao Tzu will bring you guys to do something big. How about it?" "Something big?" Cheng Chumo subconsciously raised his head and was somewhat curious. "What big thing? You're not thinking of pushing us into a pit of fire, are you?" He did not think that Feng Zi had anything big to do. Now that they were close to the Turkic camp, what big thing could they do? Could it be that they were going to court death? This Feng Zi, "We're all brothers. You can't harm us." Du Go was also worried. His thoughts were similar to Cheng Chumo's. He did not think that Feng Zi could bring them to do anything big. On the contrary, he knew how to play tricks. "Don't worry. It's definitely not a bad thing." Zhang Feng revealed a harmless smile. "I guarantee that you guys will feel that this trip was not in vain." The three of them looked at each other. For a moment, they did not know how to answer. This was because they knew that Feng Zi was not a kind person. He said that he was going to do something big, but he did not specify what it was. This caused their hearts to be in a mess. They were afraid that this fellow would leave them to be fed to the Turks if they were not careful. No, they had to ask more clearly. "Feng Zi, what big thing are you bringing us to do? Can you be a little clearer?" Cheng Chumo looked curiously at Zhang Feng. As he spoke, he held tightly onto Zhang Sun, afraid that Zhang Feng would have some improper thoughts about him. "That's right, Feng Zi. You should have told us earlier so that we would have been prepared." Du Go could not help but interject. His body was trembling, but it was unknown whether it was from the cold or from fear. "What's with all this nonsense?" Zhang Feng waved his hand impatiently. "You guys are used to being wastrels. When you hear that you're going to do something big, you're actually so scared. Lao Tzu originally wanted to do something big this time to wash away your bad reputation. Since you guys are so scared, then don't go. Lao Tzu will go alone. When he comes back, don't drool." Chapter 1867. With that, he crossed his arms, leaving his back to the crowd. He seemed to be unable to restrain his anger, but in fact, he was already overjoyed. He had said those words to provoke these guys. In his heart, he really hoped that they would do it together. After all, he might not be able to do it alone. Sure enough, Cheng Chumo couldn't stand it anymore. He suddenly stood up as if he couldn't feel the cold anymore. "Feng Zi, I'll do it with you." With that, he turned around and glanced at Zhang Sun and Du Go. It seemed to be a question, but it also seemed to be a threat. He admitted that what Feng Zi said just now was not wrong. He had always been regarded as a dandy, and he had never done anything that would make his family proud. Now that Feng Zi said that he was going to do something big, and it didn't seem like he was lying, then he would do it. However, just in case, he had to drag these two guys along. The two of them were startled and hesitated. They looked at each other for a while, then seemed to have made a decision in their hearts. They stood up and said, "Feng Zi will do it too." Hearing that everyone agreed, Zhang Feng slowly turned around and said with a smile, "That's right. I guarantee that you won't make this trip in vain." With that, he narrowed his eyes and looked straight at the crowded heads and tents in the valley in the distance. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. At the same time, in Chang'an City, the streets that used to be bustling with noise and excitement seemed to be covered with a layer of haze, becoming much more depressing. The Black Tortoise Gate incident made the entire Chang'an City vigilant. Occasionally, traces of blood that had not dried up could be seen on the ground. This was left behind by the stampede at that time. Even though the soldiers had cleaned it up once, it could still be clearly heard. There were many pedestrians on the streets, but most of them were merchants doing business. There were also some peddlers and lonely servants. However, they were different from usual. They could no longer hear the shouts. They seemed to have lost their strength and were listless. In fact, they did not want to come out, but their families had to spend money. There was also a crying baby waiting to be fed. All of this forced them to come out and seek a way to survive. They traveled in groups of 3 or 5. Usually, this kind of situation would not be seen at all. After all, everyone was selling similar things. When the customers saw that there were still people to choose from, naturally, it would be survival of the fittest. There were even some who would bargain. However, it was a little different these days. The storm had not completely passed yet. Traveling together was the best way. It was also a kind of self-protection. There was no other way. In order to survive, they had to do this. After walking for a long time, the group of people was probably tired. Among the crowd, Wuxia proposed to take a break. Seeing that this thing could not be sold, they might as well take a break. Thus, they simply agreed. Everyone seemed to have lost their strength and sat down on the steps, complaining incessantly. Old Wang, when do you think this Black Tortoise Gate incident will pass? Wuxia put down the load in his hand and glanced at the white-bearded old man in the crowd. Be careful with your words. The old man called Old Wang glared at Wuxia. He put his finger to his mouth and looked cautious. Then, he glanced at the side of the street. Seeing that there were no soldiers, he slowly looked at Wuxia. You bastard! You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How dare you talk about this kind of thing? Do you want your whole family to be buried with you? He was the oldest in the group. Back then, he was lucky enough to be a study companion of a rich family. He could recognize a few words and could be considered half a cultured person. In the village, he taught the children to read. Thus, everyone called him Old Wang out of respect. Usually, when people did not understand something, they would ask him. However, the things they asked this time seemed to make him a little angry. Wuxia seemed to have noticed Old Wang's anger, but he did not dare to talk back. He could only take out a steamed bun from the basket and chew it to vent his anger. Old Wang, don't be so angry. Wuxia's eyes were sharp. He quickly scooped out a bowl of fermented glutinous rice from the jar and handed it to Old Wang. He said with a smile, Old Wang, Brother Wuxia was just curious. Don't blame him. Moreover, you can see through our little thoughts. After speaking, Wuxia glanced at the crowd. His gaze paused on Wuxia for a moment. Finally, he looked at Old Wang. Old Wang, you also know that we rely on selling these steamed buns and fermented glutinous rice to support our family. Now that the imperial court has cut off our livelihood, you have to think of a way. After speaking, he glanced at Wuxia and signaled with his eyes. Then, he handed the bowl of fermented glutinous rice to Old Wang. Wuxia instantly understood. He quickly took out the steamed bun in his mouth and took out a new one from the basket. He handed it to Old Wang and smiled. Old Wang, I said something wrong just now. I apologize. However, Wuxia's words are not without reason. Now that the storm is so big, we can't sell our things. Are we waiting for death? Yes, Old Wang, you are experienced and knowledgeable. Give us an idea. If we really can't do it, let's change our profession. We really can't do this anymore. Everyone discussed and prepared to find a way out for themselves. Chapter 1868. Don't quarrel. Old Mr. Wang glanced at the crowd and gradually quieted down. Then he slowly said, I know what you are talking about, but we can't solve it in a hurry. As long as the crisis in the imperial court is not over, we will not have a good time. But we don't know when the imperial court will solve this crisis. As soon as he finished speaking, the depressed mood of the crowd immediately rose. What? Then won't our families starve to death? Yes, then when can we make money? The discussion of the crowd made old Mr. Wang feel very uncomfortable. He had watched these young people grow up. Now that there was no way to survive, he was also anxious. But it was useless to be anxious. All of this was Li Erlang's sin, and he needed to solve it. At this time, he was very disappointed with Li Erlang. Why did the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate involve the people? Wasn't this king harming people? If the emperor hadn't done that absurd thing, there might not be today's disaster. But then again, if he hadn't done that, Li Erlang wouldn't have been able to ascend the throne. He squinted his eyes and looked in the direction of the imperial palace, but there was nowhere to vent his anger. This group of brats in front of him could talk about it, but he was an elder. How could he comment on this with them? Just as he was looking up, a group of soldiers came out of the city gate of Chang, and there were 3 strongmen among them. This posture instantly attracted his attention, because he had seen before that strongmen would come as long as there was a decree from the palace. Last time, when Li Erlang announced a general amnesty, the situation was similar to this. However, the posture this time seemed to be bigger than before. There were 3 strongmen, and even half of the guards of Chang and city came out. There were also some generals in armor. Was Li Erlang going to do something? Or was he going to give a general amnesty again? He didn't care so much and quickly patted the chatting crowd. "Boys, the imperial decree came. Let's go and have a look with the old man." After that, he slowly stood up with his hands on the ground and walked to the city gate. Everyone was still talking about a way out when they were interrupted by Old Man Wang. They were a little puzzled. When they turned around, they found that the old man had already disappeared. They hurriedly carried their burdens and chased after him. On the other side, the gate of Chang and city was slowly opened. Su Lian led 2 groups of people out of the city, followed by 2 groups of imperial guards. In the middle stood 3 strongmen. The one in the middle was holding something that looked like an imperial edict. However, upon closer inspection, it was very different from an imperial edict. His face was serious, as if the thing in his hand was extremely precious. The group quickly arrived at the place where the notice was posted at the city gate. Si Lian waved his hand, and the guards immediately formed a circle and isolated the area within a radius of 20 meters, leaving only the notice wall in the middle. At this moment, Old Wang led Huzi and the others to the periphery. However, they were not the only ones. There were many merchants who also noticed this phenomenon. They put down their business and rushed over. They stretched their heads and looked at the guards curiously. "Elder, what do you think they are doing?" A kid came out and pointed at the guard. "This." Old Wang frowned and stroked his white beard. "It should be an imperial edict from the palace." This was just his guess. As for the specifics, he would have to see it. Everyone looked up and scrambled to look at the guard. They were very impatient. Everyone wanted to watch a show, and no one was an exception. Looking at the anxious crowd, Su Lian took half a step forward and bowed to the strong man behind him. "Strong man, can we post it now?" The strong man in the middle did not answer. Instead, he glanced at the 2 people beside him and nodded slightly. Then, he handed the thing in his hand to Su Lian and said in a sharp voice, "Be careful." Su Lian took it and handed it to Sang Feng. "Sang Feng, post the edict on the notice wall and send 2 soldiers to guard it." "Yes, General." Sang Feng took the edict and picked 2 soldiers at random. Then he walked directly to the notice wall. The notice wall was where the government usually issued announcements. All the edicts would be posted here for the people to read. After posting the edict, Su Lian waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to withdraw. The guards immediately rushed back into the city and closed the city gates. Seeing that the soldiers had left, everyone rushed forward, wanting to see what the decree was about. Old Wang also slowly squeezed his way forward with the help of Huzi. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Crimes have been decreed." Instantly, it caused an uproar. The entire scene was like a stone thrown into a calm lake, causing an uproar. What? Crimes have been decreed? How could His Majesty decree crimes? That's right. Someone like His Majesty has always thought that his merits surpass the 3 sovereigns and his power surpasses the 5 emperors. How could he decree crimes? He must have seen wrongly. Many people did not even believe that Li Shimin would decree crimes. This was because in everyone's impression, Li Shimin was a murderer who killed his brothers. He had long lost his humanity. How could such a person decree crimes? Chapter 1869. They widened their eyes and craned their necks to see what was going on. Even the merchants behind them tried their best to squeeze forward when they heard the news. For a moment, the notice wall was overcrowded, and there was a stampede. "Stop! Don't make a fuss!" The guards guarding the edict shouted. They were afraid of the stampede, so they had to stop it. After the shout, the crowd quieted down a little, but the noise was still incessant. They pushed each other, trying to get closer. With the help of Huzi, Mr. Wang finally found a position close to the front. He glanced at the notice wall, and his eyes suddenly widened. Was it really an edict? How could it be an edict? When he heard the words just now, he didn't believe it. But now he saw that it was true. An edict was made by an emperor who reflected on his own mistakes. How could Li Erlang make such an edict? Was he reflecting on his own mistakes? No, impossible. How could a bastard like him, who killed his brother, issue an edict? The tragedy in Chang and city was caused by Li Erlang. How could a person like him issue an edict? Mr. Wang instantly felt that his worldview had been turned upside down. Of course, he was not the only one. Anyone who knew what an edict meant felt that they had been hit. They widened their eyes, unwilling to believe that Li Erlang wrote the edict. Because in their eyes, Li Erlang was already an emperor who brought disaster to the country. Without him, how could there be such a tragedy in Chang and city? Without him, how could their relatives and friends be disabled and die? Without him, how could the ghosts of the Xuanwu Gate come back to take their lives? However, the truth was right in front of them. The edict was right in front of them. Could it be fake? They didn't dare to think about it, so they could only continue to read with a surprised expression. Since the Xuanwu Gate, I have been unable to sleep at night. I know that I am not virtuous. However, I am guilty, but I can't blame 10,000 people. Mr. Wang couldn't help but tremble when he read this. He didn't expect that Li Erlang would dare to talk about the Xuanwu Gate so openly. Didn't he know that the ghosts in the sky were watching? Or, since he had issued an edict, he was not afraid of these. However, in the second half of the sentence, Li Erlang was talking about his own sins. Was Li Erlang really going to repent? Getting rid of the thought in his mind, Old Man Wang continued reading. If I cannot protect my children and grandchildren, Li mean, they will perish. The prosperity of a nation depends on one person. The glory of a nation depends on one person's celebration. If the year is plentiful and the world is at peace, I will remove the calamity from my body and save all nations. That is my wish. I am willing to be unstingy. If I do not give myself to a wasp, I will ask to be stung. As soon as he finished speaking, the crowd started to quarrel again. Your Majesty, are you really counting your sins? His Majesty's crime has been decreed. He speaks very sincerely. Could it be that he is truly repentant? Everyone was bewildered. They couldn't believe that Li Erlang was truly remorseful. However, the letter was written so sincerely that it didn't seem fake at all. How was he going to explain this? Could it be that Li Erlang was using a delaying tactic to temporarily stabilize the hearts of the people? No, that was unlikely. The emperor's reputation was obviously more important than stabilizing the hearts of the people. At least, Li Erlang and the royal family thought so. They would not damage the royal family's dignity for such a matter. That meant that Li Erlang was truly repentant. Even the emperor of a country was repentant. It seemed that the people were still very important to Li Erlang. Everyone's eyes kept glancing at the decreed crime and slowly calmed down. They began to recall Li Erlang's merits. Although this guy killed his brother, even if the dethroned crown prince, Li Jianxing, was still alive, he might not have done better than Li Erlang. Think about it, Li Erlang led the army to war and almost half of the Tang dynasty was conquered by him. Li Jianxing didn't have any outstanding achievements. Instead, he colluded with King Qi. Not only colluded, but the two of them were no match for Li Erlang. What was the use of such an emperor? On the other hand, Li Erlang led the army to quell the chaos of the former Sui dynasty, beheaded the bandits, and bravely dominated the region. After becoming the emperor, he became much more diligent. He never missed a court meeting and reviewed memorials every day. He did not slack off. Not only that, he also appointed talents and was kind and thrifty. There were not many emperors like this in the past. However, they were still complaining here. It was really inappropriate. Everyone lowered their heads. Every time they thought of His Majesty's achievements, they blushed. Since His Majesty has already decreed crime, we should not harp on this matter. After all, His Majesty has also done a lot for the people. Everyone here is a merchant and should have a deep understanding of this. A merchant stood up. He spoke with emotion. In the past, the Sui dynasty was in constant war and business was not good. Now that His Majesty was on the throne, although there was no war, it had reduced a lot. His life was gradually getting better. As soon as this was said, everyone nodded secretly. Most of the people present were merchants and naturally knew the relationship between the two. That's right. Everyone, don't harp on it. Chapter 1870. Old Wang stroked his beard, but soon he frowned again. The crime has been committed, but this matter will not pass so easily. Think about it. The Black Tortoise Gate incident involves the royal family. I'm afraid it won't work if no one can speak up. The retired emperor? A young merchant stepped forward and glanced at the crowd. Only the retired emperor can resolve this matter. I heard that he has reconciled with the emperor. If the retired emperor is willing to speak up, I believe it can be resolved immediately. At the same time, he can shut the mouths of the people and we can do our business smoothly. Old Wang nodded. The only person who could speak up now was the retired emperor. The one who died in the Black Tortoise Gate was his son. It was impossible to say that he did not mind. Everyone in the world knew this. However, if the retired emperor was willing to speak up, he could shut the mouths of the people in the world. After all, this was the royal family's matter. No one had the right to interfere. If the retired emperor spoke up, who would dare to say anything? However, the retired emperor was not stupid. Would he speak up for such a matter? The eldest son and the second son fought for the throne. The second son killed the eldest son. This was not something to be proud of. Just as the crowd was in doubt, someone in the crowd shouted, "The retired emperor is preparing to worship heaven." This sentence brought everyone's attention back. They looked in the direction of the voice and saw a middle-aged man standing in the crowd. He was the one who said this. "How do you know?" Old Wang asked with a serious face. This was a matter of great importance to the world. It was related to the survival of their entire village. He did not dare to be careless. This news came from a brother of mine who works in the palace. The middle-aged man raised his head and looked proud. I travel extensively and am very well informed. This kind of news is just a rumor. As soon as he finished speaking, the entire street was silent. One could hear a pin drop. What shocked everyone was not the identity of this person, but the words that this person had just said. The retired emperor was preparing to sacrifice to the heavens. Originally, everyone had some doubts that this person was boasting. However, since the news came from the palace, then it might be true. Since the news was true, the retired emperor would appear to worship heaven. The storm would be over. Then Chang and would be able to regain its peace and they could make a living again. Since the retired emperor is preparing to offer sacrifices to heaven, when exactly will it be? Someone couldn't help but ask. Offering sacrifices to the heavens was a major event, and it would be best if they could go and take a look. Who knows, they might be able to benefit from the imperial aura. Probably in a few days. The middle-aged merchant frowned, and he seemed to be deep in thought as he said, "I wonder if Dean Zhang of White Deer Academy will be participating? It's such a big matter. President Zhang should be involved, right?" Most of them had received favors from Zhang Feng, so they still wanted to meet Zhang Feng. Yes, not bad. President Zhang is young and promising. She should attend such a grand event. Old man Wang stroked his beard with a smug look on his face, as if he was talking about a junior. The crowd didn't mind and just nodded vigorously. They all felt that old Wang's words made sense. Obviously, Zhang Feng had already left a good impression in their hearts as a young and promising man. At this moment, they felt that anything good they said about Zhang Feng was right. At the same time, in Shaoshan White Deer College. Following Zhang Feng's departure, the crowd didn't notice anything wrong at first. However, as time passed, some people realized that something was wrong. The first person to notice was Yuan Hong. He would usually go to the dean's place after class and ask some questions. However, when he went to look for the dean today, not only was there no one, he didn't even eat the food that was delivered. This made him very puzzled. Hence, he waited in his residence. After waiting for about 4 hours, he finally realized that something was wrong. Usually, even if the dean went out, he would be back in 2 to 4 hours at most. However, he wasn't back after so long. There was something wrong. Furthermore, the food on the table was untouched. This didn't seem like the dean's character. Could it be that he encountered some danger? Or was he kidnapped by some criminals? He shuddered and didn't dare to think about it anymore. If he continued to think about it, there wouldn't be a corpse left of the dean. Hence, he hurriedly went to look for Yu Shernan and the rest. Now that the dean wasn't around, only these few teachers could take charge of the situation. After rolling and crawling all the way, Yuan Hong finally arrived at the classroom. "Teacher, the dean is missing." He panted heavily and said with a flushed face. Yu Shernan was teaching in the classroom. When he heard the commotion, he wanted to reprimand them. However, when he heard that Feng Zi was missing, he immediately perked up. What did you just say? The dean is missing. Yuan Hong swallowed his saliva and said with difficulty. Why is Feng Zi missing? Yu Shernan put down the book in his hand and walked quickly to Yuan Hong. He said with a serious face, hurry up and explain the matter clearly. He treated Feng Zi as his disciple. Now this disciple was missing? How could he not be anxious? This student went to look for the dean just now. However, after waiting for 4 hours, I didn't see the dean. At first, I thought that the dean was out, so I waited for a while. However, the more I waited, the more I felt that something was wrong. I realized that the dean didn't even touch his food. Chapter 1871. Yuan Hong had a troubled look on his face. Halfway through his sentence, he realized that Yu Shernan was already preparing to leave. He hurriedly chased after him. Sir, wait for me. Immediately inform Xue Ji, Chu Suiyang, Ouyang Xiao, and the other old men to come over. After Yu Shernan finished his sentence, he rushed straight to Zhang Feng's residence. His speed was not any slower than an ordinary person's. This shocked Yuan Hong. Didn't they say that these teachers were all old? Why were they still so fast? It seemed that the dean's magic was great. A single message was enough to make the teachers run like they were flying. Yuan Hong did not care about the many thoughts in his mind. He turned around and ran to the other classrooms. Although Yu Shernan was already old and his stamina was not as good as a young person's, when he heard that Feng Zi had gone missing, he was extremely anxious. He strode toward his residence. Fortunately, there were no stones on the road. Otherwise, he would have been thrown off his feet. After rushing all the way, he finally arrived at Zhang Feng's residence. He pushed open the door and rushed in. When he went in, there was indeed no one. There was still some food on the table, but no one had touched it. That kid really went missing. Yu Shernan frowned. His face was a little pale. Where can he go? After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly walked out of the door. Just as he stepped out, he saw Chu Suiyang and the others walking toward him. Brothers, you're finally here. Yu Shernan quickly stepped forward and said impatiently, Feng Zi is missing. Chu Suiyang had his hands behind his back. When he saw that it was Yu Shernan, he immediately stopped and frowned. We already know the news. The most important thing now is to find Feng Zi. After saying that, he turned his head and glanced at Xue Ji and the others behind him. That's right. Feng Zi's disappearance is a big matter. We need to treat it seriously. Xue Ji stroked his sparse beard and frowned. However, with us old men, I'm afraid we don't have enough manpower. In Old Man's opinion, we should borrow the strength of all the students in the academy to search together. Right. Yu Shernan nodded repeatedly. Then he looked at Yuan Hong and said hurriedly, Yuan Hong, immediately mobilize all the students to search for Feng Zi's whereabouts. Remember, don't let go of the entire Shao Mountain. Yuan Hong nodded and turned to run towards the classroom. Xue Ji still felt that it was not safe enough. He waved his hand and added, remember to look for it in the Forging Workshop and Research Institute. After saying that, he turned to look at Yu Shernan and the others. Let's go look for him too. Maybe that kid ran over there? Not bad. Chu Suiyang nodded with a worried look on his face. I don't think the two girls know about this yet. Let's go there and look for them. We'll tell them while we're at it. Jing Shu and Zhang Yuyao were both Feng Zi's unmarried wives. She had to inform them of such a big event. Ouyang Xiao frowned and stroked his beard. I'm afraid it's inappropriate. If we old men go to the girl's residence, what if we bring gossip to Feng Zi? What's inappropriate about it? Yu Shernan glared and seemed to be dissatisfied. As Feng Zi's teachers, we naturally have to take charge of the situation now that Feng Zi is not around. What's there to be afraid of? Moreover, the two girls are considered juniors. Who dares to gossip about old man? After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeve and directly walked towards Zhang Yuyao's residence. In his heart, he was actually unwilling to go. After all, it wasn't nice for a teacher to go to the residence of his disciple's wife. However, now that Feng Zi had gone missing, even if he was unwilling, he had to go because no one could take charge of the situation. When the three of them saw that Yu Shernan was slightly angry, they knew that it was serious and quickly followed him. The four of them were almost 60 years old. Usually they would stagger when they walked, but today they seemed to be full of energy. Each of their steps was faster than the other, and they were unusually energetic. There was no other reason but because their disciple was missing, they seemed to have something supporting them in their hearts. In a short while, the four of them arrived at the residence of the two girls. "Girls, are you in?" It was not easy to enter, so Yushirnan could only shout outside the door. Hearing the voice, the two girls who were doing needlework quickly put down the things in their hands, lifted their skirts, and walked out. When they saw that it was the four gentlemen, they were puzzled, but they still bowed. "Gentlemen, may I know why you are here today?" Usually, because of the taboo between men and women, the four gentlemen never came to their residence. Even if they came, Prince Zhang would accompany them. Why did the four gentlemen come together today? Although they were puzzled, the two girls only lowered their heads. "Did Feng Zi come to your place?" Yu Shernan looked at the two girls and asked nervously. "Prince Zhang?" Jingshu raised her head and looked at Zhang Yuyao. She was puzzled and then looked at Yu Shernan. "No what? Gentlemen. Oh, that's bad." Xueji spread his hands and said bitterly, "Feng Zi is missing." "Ah, Prince Zhang is missing?" Zhang Yuyao's expression changed and she exclaimed, "How can Prince Zhang be missing? Isn't he at the academy?" Chapter 1872. That's right. How could a living person go missing? Jing Shu stepped forward, looking nervous. "We don't know yet. Since Feng Zi isn't here, let's go somewhere else to look." Yu Shernan sighed and was a little disappointed. He then looked at the other old fellows. "Let's go somewhere else to look." With that, he waved his sleeves and turned to leave. Xue Ji and the others followed closely behind. Only two lonely girls were left. "Sister Jingshu, what should we do now?" Zhang Yuyao grabbed Jingshu and stomped her feet anxiously. She treated Prince Zhang as her husband. Now that her husband was missing, she was the most anxious. Don't worry. Let me think." Jingshu patted Zhang Yuyao's shoulder and lowered her head to think. After a while, she looked up and said, "We two weak girls can't do anything now. Why don't we go and look?" Zhang Yuyao nodded hurriedly. In fact, her mind was already in a mess. She didn't have any ideas. Now that Jingshu suggested it, she naturally agreed. "Then let's go." Without hesitation, Jingshu pulled Zhang Yuyao and ran toward the classroom. When they reached the field, they saw a large group of students coming out of the classroom. The leader was Yuan Hong. "Yuan Hong, how is it? Do you know where Prince Zhang is?" Jingshu stopped Yuan Hong and asked anxiously. "So it's Miss Jingshu." Yuan Hong stopped and wiped the sweat on his forehead. He said, "We don't know where the dean is yet. I'm going to look for him. I'll talk to you later." With that, he ran forward and waved to the students behind him. "You guys go to the workshop. You guys go to the research institute. You guys go to the cafeteria. The rest of you go up the mountain. We must find the dean." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone split up into groups of 3 and 5 and ran in different directions. The news of the dean's disappearance swept through the entire academy like a hurricane. Everyone began to move out with only one goal, and that was to find the dean. For a moment, the whole Shao Mountain was filled with students of the academy. Everyone kept searching on the mountain, as if they had forgotten the time. The winter weather seemed to pass very quickly, and soon the sun was setting in the west. They had no choice but to hold up their torches and search every corner of the mountain carefully. However, no matter how hard the students searched, it was as if the dean had evaporated into thin air. There was no trace of him at all. Even the cafeteria, the chicken coop, and other places that they could think of were searched. However, they still couldn't find the dean's figure. This made everyone extremely anxious. Yu Shernan and the others even planned to meet the emperor and ask for help from the imperial court. They knew that Li Erlang would not ignore Feng Zi's disappearance. At the same time, on the hot air balloon, gusts of cold wind blew, causing Zhang Feng and the others to curl up together due to the cold. "Where are we?" Zhang Feng pulled out the blanket and looked at Tainyo beside him. Cheng Chumo snorted softly and slowly opened his half-closed eyes. He glanced down. However, he couldn't see anything in the boundless dark night. he only saw some light and could only reply faintly, "I don't know where we are." With that, he wrapped the spy around him again. It seemed that he was quite cold. Zhang Feng wasn't used to his bad habit. He pulled the spy back and glanced down. "Why does this light look like fire?" With that, he frowned and felt that something was wrong. This was Xing's state. There weren't even any soldiers here. How could there be fire? Could it be the Turks? Yes, it must be the Turks. Only the Turks had such a habit. He sat up abruptly and rubbed his eyes. It was indeed fire, and there was more than one fire. "Tai Niu, the Bing worm, get up quickly." Zhang Feng pushed the three of them, looking anxious. "What's wrong?" Zhang Sun yawned and glanced at Zhang Feng lazily. He was sleeping, but he was woken up by this fellow. He was furious. "Look over there." Zhang Feng pulled Zhang Sun up and pointed in the direction of the fire. "That should be the main camp of the Turks." "The main camp of the Turks?" Cheng Chumo grabbed the metal wire and looked in the direction of the fire. Indeed, there were quite a few fires. It was nighttime, and based on the habits of the Turks, they would light a campfire near their main camp. The main reason was to prevent the ambush of wild beasts, and another reason was to provide warmth. Seeing so many campfires below, it must be the main camp of the Turks. That meant that he was moving toward the main camp of the Turks? What if a hot air balloon landed in the main camp? Wouldn't he become a captive of the Turks? Thinking of this, he shuddered. "Fengzi, hurry up and think of a way to return. This is the main camp of the Turks. We'll die if we go there." Cheng Chumo grabbed Zhang Feng's shoulders and pleaded. Zhang Sun and Du Go seemed to have understood the severity of the matter. They turned to Zhang Feng and pleaded, "Fengzi, hurry up and think of a way. My family is counting on me to carry on the bloodline. I don't want to die here." Chapter 1873. Why are you all so cowardly? Zhang Feng swung Cheng Chumo's arm. "You were the one who said that you wanted to do something big with Lao Tzu? Why are you so cowardly now?" He thought that these fellows would have some guts, but he didn't expect them to wet their pants before they even reached the Turkic camp. "Fengzi, you can't say that," Du Go said with a sullen face. "You only said that you wanted to do something big, but you didn't say what it was. We didn't expect you to come to the Turkic camp." "That's right, Fengzi. Didn't you say that you wanted to do something big? Let's go back to Chang." Zhang Sun Chong pulled Zhang Feng and tried to change the topic. After saying that, he glanced at Cheng Chumo and signaled him with his eyes. Cheng Chumo immediately understood and pulled Zhang Feng back. "Fengzi, let's go. Let's go back to Chang. Even if you want to blow up the imperial city, I'll go with you." "Wait." Zhang Feng waved his hands and pushed their arms away. He sneered. "The big thing I said just now is to blow up the Turkic camp." As soon as he finished speaking, the three of them were stunned. They stared at Zhang Feng as though they were looking at an alien. At this moment, their first reaction was that Fengzi was crazy. He wanted to blow up the Turkic camp with just 4 people? If that wasn't crazy, then what was going on? "Fengzi, are you okay? Did you freeze?" Cheng Chumo stepped forward and took off his clothes as he spoke. He was very nervous. Come, Fengzi, put on my clothes. Don't talk nonsense." If Fengzi really went crazy, they wouldn't be able to explain themselves when they returned. They could only take off a few clothes to protect this fellow. Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go were also nervous. They hurriedly picked up the blanket in the basket and passed it to Zhang Feng. They were also worried that Fengzi had gone crazy. After all, they were all in the same boat. If this fellow went crazy, how could they get off the pirate ship? Everyone's actions made Zhang Feng a little confused. Damn it, he asked them to blow up the Turkic camp out of goodwill to earn some merit, but these fellows said that Lao Tzu had gone crazy? However, Cheng Tinyu was still a loyal fellow. He knew that he had to take off a shirt to protect himself from the cold. It's indeed a little cold. Zhang Feng took the coat and put it on. Then his expression changed. He shouted, "Do you guys really think that Lao Tzu has gone crazy?" Zhang Sun Chong was stunned. Feng Zi's words didn't sound like something a lunatic would say. Was this fellow fine? So, he probed, "You're not crazy?" Of course Lao Tzu isn't crazy. Zhang Feng straightened his coat and glared at the crowd. "You bastards, Lao Tzu brought you to blow up the Turkic camp out of goodwill to earn some merit, and you say that Lao Tzu has gone crazy? If not for the fact that you gave your coat and blanket to Lao Tzu would have kicked you off the ship. The scolding made the three of them shudder. They were now certain that this fellow wasn't crazy. A lunatic wouldn't say so much at once, not to mention Lao Tzu. But why did this fellow want to blow up the Turkic camp? Wasn't he courting death? After all, there were only 4 of them. Even if they went down, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Fengzi, since you aren't crazy, why did you urge us to blow up the Turkic camp? Cheng Chumo hugged his chest and shivered in the cold wind. The Turkic incident made him forget that his coat was still in Fengzi's hands. Yes, there are only 4 of us. Aren't we courting death if we go? Du Go was also puzzled. His side was so weak. Wouldn't they be courting death if they went? You don't know shit. Zhang Feng glared at the crowd and spat. Then, he looked in the direction of the Turkic camp and struck a pose that he thought was very handsome. The Turkic people have been invading the Tang dynasty for many years. They can be said to be the enemy of the Tang dynasty. Now that they are stationed in Xingzhou, it's probably because they don't have enough food and are preparing to raid. As men of the Tang dynasty, of course, we have to get rid of these guys. After that, he turned to the crowd and smiled. I know you're afraid, but we have gunpowder. Later, we'll throw the gunpowder down from the sky. It'll definitely blow up these sons of B** cheese. What do you think? The 3 of them didn't immediately respond. Instead, they looked at each other as if they were thinking about something. Damn it. What are you guys waiting for? Zhang Feng was a little unhappy. He glared at the crowd and said, Don't you want to get rid of your reputation as a foppish son? Now is an opportunity. As long as we kill the Turkic leader, these guys will definitely withdraw their troops. At that time, not only you guys, but even your families will benefit from your glory. Have you thought it through? The 3 of them were slightly stunned. They seemed to have been inspired by Zhang Feng's words. Their eyes were filled with vigor. Fengzi was right. If he were to blow up the Tujue's camp this time, then when he returned to Chang, and wouldn't he have to give face to his family? If he were to blow up Xieli, then his family would have to put him on a pedestal, and he would be able to get rid of his reputation as a dandy. Chapter 1874. However, on second thought, there were only 4 of them while there were tens of thousands of Turks. Maybe there were even hundreds of thousands of them. How could they blow up this small amount of gunpowder? They couldn't even move a hair of the Turks. No, this method wouldn't work. The 3 of them looked at each other and talked for a while as if they had reached some kind of agreement. Wait, let us think about it first. Cheng Chumo said casually. After that, he waved his hand and pulled Zhang Sunchong and Du Go to one side. Come here. This was a big matter. He wanted to discuss it with these 2 guys. Humph, you still need to discuss such a small matter. Zhang Feng looked disdainful and turned to look at the Turk camp. At first, he didn't want to blow up the Turk camp in Xingzhou. However, the hot air balloon kept floating in the direction of Xingzhou. Moreover, Qing Tiniu even took out the gunpowder. This terrible idea slowly emerged. The Turks were the enemies of the Tang dynasty. Even if they didn't blow up today, these guys would still come south after a while. Therefore, it was better to take action before they came to plunder. After a while, the 3 guys finally finished their discussion. They came to Zhang Feng and said, Fengzi, we've decided to do it. In fact, they didn't want to do it, but they found a very serious problem. They had boarded a pirate ship and couldn't get off. Yes, this was a hot air balloon. They couldn't land now unless they jumped down. It was better to fight than to fall into the hands of the Turks. That's my good brother. Zhang Feng chuckled and patted the 3 on their shoulders. Come, take out the gunpowder. Let's get ready. Cheng Chumo smiled bitterly. Who was your good brother? Was this how good brothers should be? However, he naturally didn't dare to say these words. He looked in the direction of Chang, and found that he suddenly missed old Cheng. His father was still the best. He usually taught him to march and fight at home. He also said that a real soldier wasn't a hothead, but someone who could eat and sleep. Once on the battlefield, don't rush to charge first. You must hide at the back and fight for the head. Although he was afraid, when he thought of his father's teachings, he couldn't help but feel more confident. Back then, his father treated him very well. He heard from his mother that when he was just born, his father boasted to everyone about how amazing the sons of the Cheng family were. He said that they would definitely do great things in the future. When he was 3 years old, his father taught him how to drink. When he was 4 years old, he taught him how to ride a horse. When he was 7 years old, his father told him what kind of woman would give birth to the best children. Thinking about it carefully, it would be pretty good if his father didn't beat him often. But now, he was going to accompany this guy to his death. If his father was here, he would definitely be sad. Not only him, but also Zhang Sunchong. His heart was like a bottle of mixed feelings. No matter what, he was still a relative of the royal family and had countless honors. It was not an exaggeration to say that he could do whatever he wanted on the streets of Chang. The emperor was his uncle, the empress was his aunt, the crown prince was his cousin, and his father was the Duke of Qi. Who dared to provoke Lao Tzu? But now, he had to throw his life away with this lunatic. It wasn't worth it. However, he had already boarded the pirate ship. There was no room for regret unless he jumped down from here. Glancing at the height of 1,000 feet, he shuddered. If he jumped down, he would probably be smashed to pieces, right? He would also be trampled by the Turks. It was scary just thinking about it. It was better to obediently pack up the gunpowder. Even if he died, he had these guys with him. It was not a loss. Under the reluctant packing of the three, the gunpowder was finally ready. Hee, with this gunpowder, we can definitely blow these sons of B***cheese to death. Zhang Feng looked at the bundled gunpowder in front of him and couldn't help laughing. Then, he glanced at everyone and instructed, "Listen to my orders later. Throw it when I tell you to. Don't throw it randomly. Otherwise, you won't be able to blow Shelly to death." There was only 1,200 caddies of gunpowder, while the Turks had at least 10,000. If they wanted to blow Shelly to death, they had to throw it all into Shelly's main tent. This couldn't be sloppy, so he instructed everyone. "Got it?" Cheng Chumo reluctantly replied. Right now, he just wanted to end this quickly and return to Chang. He didn't want to play with this madman anymore. Every time he played, it was a matter of life and death. He still had to carry on the Cheng family's ancestral line and couldn't bear this kind of torment. Zhang Sunchong and the other two were silent because their thoughts were similar to Cheng Chumo's. They just wanted to leave this troublesome place as soon as possible. Moreover, they had already discussed earlier that the three of them would advance and retreat together. If Feng Zi was too excessive, then Tainyo would be the one to resist. After all, this guy was strong and could fight evenly with anyone. Since you guys don't have any objections, then I'll go do some work now. Zhang Feng smiled. He actually knew what these guys were thinking. However, since they had boarded Lao Tzu's ship, there was no reason to disembark. Cough cough. From now on, the three of you will take turns to keep watch. Once you see Shelly's main tent, notify immediately. The other two rest. In a while we'll throw the gunpowder, so rest up first. What about you? Zhang Sunchong frowned. He had a bad premonition. Chapter 1875. As for me, I'll be in charge of supervising you. Zhang Feng chuckled. Then, he laid down in the basket and glanced at the Turkic camp. You guys monitor them well. Don't slack off. Although he had these fellows monitor the Turkic camp, he was still worried. Thus, he decided to monitor them himself. Otherwise, what if they drifted away? The three had no choice but to follow Zhang Feng's orders. The first to monitor the Turkic camp was Zhang Sunchong. He was pushed here by Cheng Chumo and Wuxia. The reason was that he talked too much. If this fellow had not interjected earlier, there might not have been a need to monitor them. Zhang Sunchong had a stomach full of bitterness. He had only said one sentence, and this counted. Helpless, he could only lie down beside the basket and seriously monitor the Turkic camp. At the same time, in the Turkic camp, tents were erected in the hills. Upon closer inspection, there were at least 100,000 tents. There were also 3 campfires beside each tent, illuminating the sky as if it was daytime. The Turkic people sat in groups of 3 or 5 by the campfires to warm themselves. One of the campfires seemed to be particularly lively, with endless laughter. Bao Shan, I heard that your tribe brought 10,000 men this time? A bearded man tore off a lamb leg from the rack and said with a smile as he chewed. That's right, Kaiki. Our tribe has a strong army this year. 10,000 men is nothing. The man called Bao Shan picked up the wineskin in front of him and clinked it with the person beside him. Then he drank it in one gulp, his face filled with pride. No matter how strong the army is, isn't it still the great Khan's? Kaiki looked at Bao Shan with a trace of disdain in his eyes. Seemingly sensing the other party's displeasure, he turned his gaze to the others and said with a smile, Come, let's drink and eat. He was Xieli Khan's subordinate. As the subordinate of the overlord of the grassland, he naturally had the right to look down on others. No one was an exception to this. However, he did not notice the trace of coldness in Bao Shan's eyes. Bao Shan was naturally not an ordinary person. He was Tuli's subordinate. These past few years, on the surface, Tuli and Xieli seemed to have a very good relationship, as if they were blood-related uncle and nephew, but he knew that the two of them were secretly scheming against each other. He had long been dissatisfied with this Xieli's lackey in front of him, but it was not good for him to flare up, because the other party's influence was really much greater than his own. He could only pick up the wineskin on the ground and drink alone. At this moment, a man beside him quietly stepped forward and whispered into his ear, Don't be angry. Xieli is powerful now. Bao Shan glanced at the man, snorted, picked up the wineskin and drank again. Everyone also felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. They could only laugh dryly and drink silently. At this time, a burly man led a group of people into the big tent. Seeing this, Bao Shan promptly got up to greet him. She crossed her right hand over her chest and said respectfully, Little Khan Tuli, Khan Xieli has been waiting for you for a long time. Tuli only nodded slightly without saying anything. He then walked toward the campfire and asked, Kaiki, what were you guys talking about just now? Reporting to the little Khan, your subordinate did not talk about anything. We were just drinking. Kaiki hurriedly stood up, crossed his right hand over his chest, and said respectfully, That's good. Tuli snorted coldly and waved his hand. Let's go into the tent. Seeing that Tuli had left, Kaiki slowly got up. However, a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes. Inside the tent, as soon as Tuli led the group into the tent, they saw many people sitting high up in the tent eating meat and drinking wine. In the middle stood Han dancers, and at the highest point was his uncle, Xieli. Tuli, why are you only here now? Take a seat. Xieli immediately got up when he saw Tuli and laughed heartily. Everyone also looked at Tuli and politely smiled back. These were all Turkic nobles. Many of them had troops and horses in their hands, enough to dominate a region. Uncle, you are too polite. Tuli smiled and hurriedly went forward. He gave Xieli a bear hug before letting go and found a place to sit down. He was the son of the previous Khan. It was reasonable to say that the Khan was his. However, when his father died, he was still young. Therefore, the Khan was temporarily inherited by Xieli. Over the years, Xieli had given him some benefits in order to put up a show. He also let him manage the grassland. However, he knew very well that Xieli did this to shut the nobles' mouths. After all, the Khan did not belong to him. He had not forgotten how to take back the Khan that belonged to him. However, Xieli's power was too great. There was no chance at all. He also knew that his uncle had been guarding against him. Therefore, he had not lived well over the years. Sometimes, he even thought of forming an alliance with the Tang dynasty to destroy Xieli together. However, when he thought of his father, this idea was slowly dispelled. When his father was on the throne, which force in the Central Plains did not pay tribute to him like the Turks? He would not want to see him ask for help from the Tang dynasty. However, this power-stealing guy in front of him was very annoying. Just as he was thinking about countermeasures, Xieli picked up the wine cup in his hand and slowly got up. Everyone, I have gathered everyone here. I don't need to say more. You all know what I mean. That is, how to attack the Tang dynasty. Chapter 1876. Winter was approaching. There was not much food stored in the grassland, only some cattle and sheep. However, it was not a solution to keep killing cattle and sheep. What about next year? The only way was to rob and plunder. This was also a tradition of the Turks since ancient times. As long as winter came, they must go south to plunder. The leaders of the various tribes also deeply understood this principle, which was why everyone had gathered together. Khan, what's there to discuss? Just fight. A man with chest hair stood up. He walked to the middle and hugged a Han woman. He rubbed her body and laughed. Look, the women of the Tang dynasty are so soft and tender. Bring them back to warm the bed. Ha, Go-To is right. Women like this are waiting for us in the Tang dynasty. We can't miss it. Another burly man walked out. He held a wine glass in his left hand and a dancer in his right hand. He had a lewd smile on his face. His laughter seemed to be infectious. For a moment, the whole tent laughed. Only two people seemed to be uninterested in what everyone was talking about. They just looked at everything in front of them silently. Tuli, what do you think? Xieli raised his wine cup, looked at Tuli, and said with a smile, or should I say? Or do you have any way for us to break into the Tang dynasty in one fell swoop? Although he seemed to be asking, he was actually probing. Tuli was the son of the previous Khan. Although he did not have much power now, his fame was far greater than his. Therefore, he needed to find out his strength. And this probing was to test his strategy and wisdom. Tuli naturally sensed Xieli's probing. He smiled. Uncle, in my opinion, what Go-To said just now is very reasonable. Just fight and beat them until they are convinced. Xieli was stunned. He thought Tuli would say something. He did not expect him to just go with the flow. It seemed that this nephew really did not have any strategy. He was thinking too much. Okay, then let's fight. Xieli smiled in relief. Then he raised his wine glass and looked at everyone. Tomorrow, everyone will attack together and snatch the women. Snatch the women. Snatch the women. Snatch the women. Everyone raised their wine glasses. Everyone was excited. His voice traveled all the way to the outside of the tent and didn't dissipate for a long time. The soldiers patrolling outside the tent seemed to be infected by the sound and cheered incessantly, because they knew that they could soon go to the Tang dynasty to plunder. At that time, the gold, beauties, tea bricks, and so on would all be his. Everyone couldn't suppress the excitement in their hearts and started dancing on the ground. At this moment, a huge black shadow slowly swept across the ground like a giant bird, covering the sky and the moon. The soldiers quickly sensed the abnormality and raised their heads. They saw a black shadow moving slowly. It looked as if it was going to cover the moon. Everyone was puzzled. The thing in the sky didn't seem to be small, so much so that it left a huge shadow on the ground. For a moment, everyone was pointing at the thing in the sky and talking about it. What is this thing in the sky? How can it be so huge? Yeah, and he can even fly in the sky. It's really incredible. He can fly? Could it be the heavenly wolf god? As soon as these words were spoken, it instantly caused a great commotion. Everyone's discussion became louder, and even their emotions were stirred up. They kept circling around the tent. Because the Turks had always claimed that they were the descendants of wolves, they called the wolves the heavenly wolf god and believed that the heavenly wolf god was omnipotent. Now that they saw this miracle that they had never seen before, they naturally attributed everything to the heavenly wolf god. Of course, there was a story behind all this. The Turks were originally a branch of the Xiongnu, but they were later destroyed by a neighboring country. At that time, there was a 10-year-old boy. The soldiers saw that he was too young and couldn't bear to kill him. So they chopped off his legs and threw him into the grass. Later, the child was saved by a female wolf. When he grew up, he mated with the wolf. When the king of the neighboring country heard that the child had grown up, he was afraid that there would be trouble in the future, so he sent people to kill him. The people who killed the child saw that there was a wolf beside him and wanted to kill it as well. The wolf escaped and fled to a cave in the north of Gaocheng. In that cave, the wolf gave birth to 10 little boys. They gradually grew up, formed their own families, and reproduced. One of them lived in the area of Altai Mountain. Altai Mountain was shaped like a helmet during battle. The locals called them the Turks, so they took the name of the Turks. There was another story. The Turks were originally in the north of the Xiongnu. The leader of the tribe had 17 brothers. One of them was called Iji Nishitu, who was born of a wolf. Nishitu married 2 wives, and one wife gave birth to 4 boys. The eldest son was called Nadu Lu, who was later promoted to the leader of the tribe and named the Turks. Nadu Lu had 10 wives. After Nadu Lu's death, the 10 wives brought their sons to the tree and agreed that all the children would jump toward the tree. Whoever jumped the highest would be the leader. Ashi, who was born of Nadu Lu's concubine, was young and agile. He jumped higher than all the other children and was promoted to the leader. This story also showed that the Turks were passed down by wolves. Chapter 1877. That was why the Turks valued the heavenly wolf god so much. Soon, the soldiers' discussion alarmed the nobles in the tent, and they sent their subordinates out to inquire. "What's the commotion outside?" A bearded man opened the tent flap and stroked the scimitar at his waist, glaring angrily at the crowd. "Don't you know that the Khan is discussing something important? Are you tired of living?" The flickering light shone on the man's face, making him look sinister and terrifying. The crowd wasn't in the mood to care about that. They all pointed to the sky and looked at the man. "General Yashin, look at what's in the sky. Everyone is saying that the heavenly wolf god is here? Take a look. Heavenly wolf god?" Yashin frowned. He was also a Turk and also believed in the heavenly wolf god, but he had never seen it before. Now, the heavenly wolf god had actually appeared? He couldn't hold back his curiosity and glanced at the sky. With just one glance, he felt like his world was about to collapse. Something was flying in the sky? And it wasn't small either? Could it really be the heavenly wolf god? Yes, it had to be the heavenly wolf god. Only the heavenly wolf god had such magical powers. He could no longer suppress the joy in his heart and scrambled into the tent. Because he was too excited, he almost stumbled. Fortunately, he steadied himself in time and hurriedly prostrated himself on the ground, shouting, "Great Khan Sheli, the heavenly wolf god has appeared outside." At this point, everyone's eyes suddenly widened. The tent was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Only Yashin was still talking to himself. After a while, Sheli seemed to have sensed something. He slammed the table and stood up, looking at Yashin excitedly. What did you just say?" When he heard Yashin mention the heavenly wolf god, he thought that this guy was drunk and talking nonsense. But the more he heard, the more he felt that something was wrong. The heavenly wolf god had appeared? How the hell was that possible? As the ruler of the grassland, he had never seen the heavenly wolf god. How could a small general like you see the heavenly wolf god? Not only Shelley, but everyone else also sensed that something was wrong. They all stood up and looked at Yashin seriously. "What did you just say?" "Say it again?" "That's right. If you dare to blaspheme the heavenly wolf god, Lao Tzu will exterminate your entire clan." They were all nobles and overlords of the grassland. In their hearts, they had supreme reverence for the heavenly wolf god. They believed that everything they had was bestowed upon them by the heavenly wolf god and that the heavenly wolf god was their ancestor. Even a person of his status had never seen his ancestor. How dare a small general like you talk nonsense here? At this moment, almost all of them thought that Yaxen was either crazy or trying to blaspheme the heavenly wolf god. The heavenly wolf god held a supreme position in their hearts. Anyone who dared to blaspheme the heavenly wolf god would die without a doubt. Obviously, everyone doubted the veracity of Yaxen's words. After all, no one had ever seen the serious god. Now, this guy was saying that the serious god had appeared? Moreover, it was so sudden. Who would believe it? It was like you were praying to Buddha. As you prayed, someone said that Buddha had appeared. Would you be able to accept it immediately? Of course not. His first reaction was to be dumbfounded. However, Yaxen didn't think so. He had seen the heavenly wolf god with his own eyes. "Khan, nobles, everything I said is true." Yaxen looked around at everyone. He kept waving his hands and pointed outside the tent from time to time. He was very emotional. "When I went out to take a look just now, I saw something flying in the sky. It had already covered the moon. Tell me, if that isn't the heavenly wolf god, then what is it?" As soon as he finished speaking, the tent fell silent. Everyone was silent. Shelley frowned. This guy didn't look like he was lying. Moreover, this guy had no reason to lie and wouldn't dare to do so. "But, let's go. Everyone follow me out and take a look." He waved his hand and decided to go out and take a look. Everyone didn't hesitate. They got up and followed him. After all, Xianxia didn't have the guts to lie to everyone. After listening for so long, they might as well go out and take a look. For a time, almost everyone in the tent had left. Only one table was left. That was Tuli. He felt that something was wrong and was hesitating whether to go or not. "Little Khan, what should we do?" Bao Shan whispered in Tuli's ear. Tuli frowned. Although he felt that something was wrong, everyone had gone out. It seemed a little inappropriate for him to not go. So he said, "Let's go and take a look too." After saying that, he stood up, waved his sleeve, and walked out of the tent. Outside the tent, as soon as Xieli led everyone out, he found a dark shadow on the ground. The soldiers were dancing as if they were cheering for something. They kept shouting, "Long live the heavenly wolf god." He sensed the abnormality and suddenly looked up. He vaguely saw some shadow floating in the sky. The shadow actually covered the moon. What was that? How could it fly in the sky? And it could even cover the moon? It seemed a little too magical. Could it be that it was the heavenly wolf god like everyone said? He wasn't the only one who had this question. The nobles also had this question. Chapter 1878. They all looked up at the shadow in the sky. For a moment, they didn't know what to say, because they had never seen such a scene before. A shadow that could cover the moon. This was the King Heavenly Wolf God. Tuli was the slowest. At this moment, he was also deeply shocked by the scene in the sky. His eyes widened, as if he didn't want to believe it, but he didn't think it was a problem. Because everyone said it was the Heavenly Wolf God, he had no reason to refute. Moreover, this thing was indeed flying in the sky. Wasn't it compatible with the Heavenly Wolf God's influence? Also, other than the Heavenly Wolf God, who else had such divine power? Could it fly in the sky? For a moment, everyone seemed to tacitly agree that the shadow in the sky was the Heavenly Wolf God. Many people had already knelt on the ground and began to pray, blurting out things like "Bless the grassland with good weather." Fortunately, Xieli was still rational. He didn't kneel like a soldier, but waved his hand. "Call the shaman." He wasn't doubting the Heavenly Wolf God, but there was a tradition in the grassland. If there were any miracles, incomprehensible signs, or signs that weren't man-made, they needed to find a shaman for divination. Just like now, this thing in the sky was a miracle, but no one knew why it appeared. Or what instructions did it have? This required a shaman to divine and communicate with the Heavenly Wolf God to express the Heavenly Wolf God's intentions. The shaman soon arrived. He wore strange clothes and held all kinds of magic tools in his hands. When he saw the shadow in the sky, he seemed to be wrong and stood still for a long time. After a moment, he seemed to remember something and hurried forward. "Khan." He crossed his arms and bowed to Xieli. "Quickly communicate with the Heavenly Wolf God." Xieli waved his hand and didn't care much. Instead, he looked at the sky with excitement. "Yes." The shaman nodded and then waved his hand. Two people stood behind him. They were holding a skeleton, which looked like a wolf's skeleton. It had been air-dried and was embedded with all kinds of gems. When the wolf skeleton was carried out, everyone present seemed to have changed into another person. Facing the wolf skeleton, they crossed their arms across their chests. Even Xieli and Tuli were no exception. Tingri, their faces were solemn as they cheered loudly. Tingri was the Turkic people's word for blessings. The general idea was that the God of Heaven was protecting them. In this case, it was the Heavenly Wolf God protecting them. After praying for blessings, the wizard began to perform the ritual. He danced around the wolf bone, shaking his magic weapon and muttering, "Tingri, Tingri, please bless the people of the grassland to never go hungry. Tingri, please bless the invincible warriors of the grassland. Tingri, please bless the underground Khan, ever victorious." Everyone looked at the magus, and for a moment, tears welled up in their eyes. At this moment, they seemed to be resonating with each other. Everyone began to dance with joy. After about 15 minutes, the shaman's prayer finally stopped. He crossed his right hand over his chest and looked at Xieli with a sincere face. "My most respected Khan Xieli, the Sky Wolf God told me that the grassland warriors will definitely win this war." Hearing this, Xieli could not help but tear up. His right hand crossed over his chest as he looked at the hot air balloon in the sky. He said emotionally, "Thank you, heavenly wolf god." How many years had it been? Back then, at the end of the Sui dynasty, the Turks were so powerful. Didn't those aristocratic brothers in the Central Plains scramble to give them big gifts? The Turks even dominated a region. What could they not get? Did they want to go there? However, with the establishment of the Tang dynasty, these guys became more and more arrogant. Were they not willing to pay tribute? In addition, the weather on the grassland was changeable. Once winter came, the herdsman could not survive at all. He did not pity the herdsman. It was just that the herdsman did not have cattle and sheep to graze. What could they eat? Therefore, he decided to go south and teach Li Shimin, this arrogant guy, a good lesson. He would rob all the treasures of the Tang dynasty, take all the women of the Tang dynasty to the grassland, and turn all the men of the Tang dynasty into slaves to graze for him. Only in this way could he vent the hatred in his heart. He was not the only one who had this idea. Basically, all the nobles present had the same idea. Each of them had troops and horses under their command, enough to dominate a region. It was just that Xieli had more troops and horses, and he had smoothly ascended the throne. Otherwise, they would have rebelled and established themselves as kings. However, there was no harm in following Xieli this time. At least they could go to the Tang dynasty and plunder. In this way, their troops could be replenished, and this damn winter could pass peacefully. The public's thoughts always went with the flow, but there were always others who had different thoughts. As the son of the previous Khan, Tuli had been eyeing Xieli's Khan position for a long time. Because this position was originally his. It was only because he was young at that time that Xieli took it. Watching Xieli govern the grassland, he was unconvinced. However, he could only suppress this unwillingness in his heart and did not dare to say it out loud. Xieli's troops were the largest in the grassland. As long as he showed a trace of disobedience, this guy would kill him. Therefore, he had been very careful. Chapter 1879. Until now, the wizard actually said that Xieli would lead the grassland to win this war? This was undoubtedly a blow to him. It was not that he did not want the grassland to win, but that he did not want Xieli to win. Once Xieli won, this guy's reputation in the grassland would be higher, and the hope of his revival would be even slimmer. Thinking of this, Tuli felt as if a thorn had pierced his heart, and the pain was unbearable. He glanced at the cheering Xieli, and resentment grew in his heart. Xieli knew all this, but at this time he was not in the mood to care about this. Instead, he opened his arms and looked at the hot air balloon with a sincere face, trying to accept the blessing of the serious god. This was the wizard's method. As long as he looked at the serious god sincerely, the serious god would bring courage, force, wisdom, and blessings to this land. And he would lead countless grassland warriors to rush into the Tang dynasty and take away the wealth and women of the Tang dynasty. He would let this group of lowly Han people remember that the land under their feet was a gift from the serious god. Once the serious god was angry, the grassland warriors would raise their butcher's knife again and use the blood of all the people of the Tang dynasty to worship the serious god. At the same time, on the hot air balloon, Zhang Feng patted Chengchumo, who was half asleep, and said angrily, "Wake up, we have arrived at the Turks' camp." He did not even blink just now, for fear of missing the Turks' camp, but Cheng Tiniu could fall asleep as soon as he lay down. He really did not know if he was a pig in his previous life. "Fengzi, why did you disturb me again?" Cheng Chumo slowly opened his eyes and rubbed them. Then, as if he had realized something, his face changed as if he had been frightened. "Fengzi, what did you just say? We have arrived at the Turks' camp?" But. As he spoke, he suddenly got up and leaned against the basket. He looked down and only saw a dense crowd. "Oh my God, so many people? What? Are you scared?" Zhang Feng crossed his arms and sneered. "If you are scared, I will throw you down now. Then it will be fine." "How could that be?" Cheng Chumo hurriedly turned his head to look at Zhang Feng, revealing a fawning smile, as if he was afraid that the other party would really throw him down. Seeing that the other party did not speak, he said, "Feng Zi, what do we do now?" In truth, he was very afraid, but now that he was in the Turkic camp, there was no point in being afraid. Even if he jumped down, he wouldn't have an intact corpse. Besides, the Turks shouldn't be able to do anything to him while he was in the sky, right? Thinking of this, he didn't know where his courage came from, but it was as if he wasn't afraid anymore. Zhang Feng saw that this guy had finally regained some of his manliness, so he didn't pursue the matter any further. He turned to Zhang Sun, Chong, and Du Go. You guys should be fine as well, right? Then, without waiting for the two to answer, he said, since there are no problems, let's begin the preparations. Zhang Sun was furious with Du Go. Originally, the two of them wanted to say that they were scared and let Iron Bull throw them. In the end, this guy didn't even give him a chance to speak. They could only curse in their hearts that Feng Zi's son wouldn't have any eyes in the future. Cursing was one thing, but work still had to be done. The two of them reluctantly began to prepare the gunpowder. Seeing that Zhang Feng didn't call him, Cheng Chumo leaned on the basket and enjoyed the scenery. However, good things didn't last long. Zhang Feng shouted again. Cheng Tinyu, do you want to die? Do you think that you won't work if Lao Tzu doesn't call you? Hurry up and prepare. Hearing this, Cheng Chumo hurriedly covered his head and scurried away. He worked with Zhang Sun, Chong, and the others to prepare the gunpowder. At this time, Zhang Feng's anger finally subsided. He looked at the crowd and said, wait a moment. When I give the order, throw the gunpowder. Don't be confused. After saying that, he walked to the basket and observed the situation again. He was very curious. Why were so many Turks gathered together? Furthermore, they were all looking at him with their heads raised. Could it be that these fellows liked hot air balloons? However, this was a good thing. The more people there were, the more destructive the gunpowder would be. Originally, he wanted to look for Xieli's tent. Now, it seemed that Xieli might be among them. Then he would blow this place up. After making up his mind, Zhang Feng turned his head and waved his hand behind him, indicating for the people to bring the gunpowder up. The three of them understood. Each of them hugged 2 bundles of large explosives and slowly walked forward. Look over there. When I tell you to throw it, throw it. Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd with a serious face. He didn't know how many times he had reminded them. He was really worried that these fellows would ruin things. Oh, I know. You've said it 800 times. Cheng Chumo rolled his eyes at Zhang Feng impatiently. Then, he glanced down and was somewhat puzzled. Why are these dogs all gathered together? What are they doing? Isn't it obvious? Zhang Sun curled his lips as if he understood very well. They are looking down on us. We brought so much gunpowder and they didn't even dodge. They are looking down on us. Yes, they are looking down on us. Chapter 1880. Du Go nodded. It seemed like he agreed with this point. Zhang Feng was speechless. He only felt that these 3 fellows were drama queens. The Turks gathered together to look down on them? What kind of logic was that? Besides, the Turks didn't know that they were holding gunpowder in their hands. He suddenly felt that there was no way to communicate with these inhumane fellows. Otherwise, he would be led astray. Just as he was about to explain, Cheng Chumo spoke. His eyes widened as he took out a match from his waist and coldly said, Motherf asterisk Kerr, you dare to look down on me? After which, he threw the match onto the fuse. In an instant, the fuse crackled. Seeing that Cheng Chumo had lit the fuse, Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go followed suit and lit the fuse. Originally, this wasn't a big deal. Zhang Feng didn't have the mood to blame these fellows for secretly lighting the fuse. However, he didn't expect that not only did these fellows not throw it, they even imitated the 5 warriors of Wolf Ivory Mountain. After lighting the fuse, they even held it in their hands and glared at the Turks below, trying to kill them with their eyes. This scared Zhang Feng to death. He threw a slap over and said angrily, Motherf asterisk Kerr, hurry up and throw it away. Hurry up and throw it, it'll be too late. Only then did the 3 of them react. They hurriedly threw the gunpowder in their hands down. After throwing it, they still didn't seem to be satisfied. They hurriedly threw it. Zhang Feng could only watch from the side, afraid that the hot air balloon would explode. In an instant, a gift pack of 1,200 caddies of gunpowder was thrown down toward the Turks' camp. Sparks flew from the gunpowder like fireworks. However, these fireworks lost their gravity in the air and began to drift around the Turks' camp. At this moment, the Turks who were cheering underground felt that something was wrong. It seemed like something was falling from the sky, and this thing was carrying flames? Furthermore, it wasn't just a little bit. It was like the stars in the sky, getting closer and closer to them. What was going on? Everyone was puzzled and decided to ask the shamans. When it came to such incomprehensible things, people were still keen to believe in the wizards. The magus had also noticed the abnormality in the sky. He was slightly taken aback and continued to dance. However, he seemed to be even crazier now. His movements were even more exaggerated, as though he was possessed by some mysterious force. Not long after, the veins on the wizard's forehead bulged and white foam flowed out of his mouth. He jumped while muttering something. "Almighty Heavenly Wolf God, please bestow upon the prairie warriors the greatest power, so that the prairie warriors will be invincible." Hearing the cheers, the crowd became excited. It was as if they had been summoned by the Heavenly Wolf God. The blood in their bodies burned as they scrambled to cheer, "Heavenly Wolf God." Following a series of cheers, the things in the sky finally fell down. One of the fuses used to bind the gunpowder seemed to have burned out at the moment it fell to the ground. The ground that was originally illuminated by the fire suddenly flashed with a glaring white light. Rumble! The entire night sky was illuminated by the explosion of gunpowder. A huge explosion rang out, covering all other sounds. The one closest to the gunpowder was the magus. He was blown to smithereens on the spot. His head was separated from his body. Minced flesh began to roll in the sky and could be seen everywhere on the ground. Many soldiers were in the same situation. Minced flesh was scattered all over the ground. After the explosion, it was as if the entire world had quieted down. Immediately after, waves of air swept out in all directions. Wood shavings, minced flesh, and other things began to fly in the air. Kerosene leaked out and splashed on the surrounding tents. The campfire was ignited and the area within a radius of 10 feet was a sea of fire. Before Xieli could react, he felt a wave of air attack and pushed him far away. Even his ears were buzzing. At this moment he was half lying on the torn tent. His face was full of spots from iron shavings. The armor on his body had already been torn into pieces. One of his hands was trembling as he stroked his chest. The other arm was long gone. A large amount of blood flowed out of the torn wound and dyed the ground red. He squinted his eyes. It was unknown if he was unwilling to open them or if he could not open them. He was howling in grief. His body was trembling nonstop. There was not a single piece of good flesh on his body. His body was covered in blood and there was also a lot of iron shavings. It was unknown whose blood it was. At this moment, it had already invaded his entire body. Not far away, a burning tent covered a burly man's body. This man was none other than Tuli. Just now, he was overthrown by the air wave. Coincidentally, the burning tent fell down, adding injuries to his injuries. He tried hard to stretch out his right arm but found that he could not exert any strength. However, the burning tent covered his body. Waves of burning sensation came. As if he had regained his strength, he clenched his teeth and finally tore off the burning tent. At this moment, Tuli's face was finally revealed. His face was full of iron shavings and wood shavings. Wherever the iron shavings touched, there was not one that was not full of holes. Some were even bleeding. He raised his trembling right arm and stroked his left arm because he felt unbearable pain. Chapter 1881. Sure enough, the skin and flesh on his left arm were gone. A large piece of white bone was exposed as if it had been gnawed by something. He vaguely remembered that he did not have anything to defend himself against the powerful blast of air just now, so he subconsciously raised his left arm. That was what he got in return. The pain was unbearable. He subconsciously touched his side and a piece of cloth appeared in his hand. He clenched his teeth and pulled with his right arm, but the cloth did not move at all. He had no choice but to use more strength. Although he was injured, the grassland men had always been brave. This problem did not stop him. The cloth was slowly pulled apart, and an ear-piercing sound was heard. If it was under normal circumstances, he might have found it pleasant to hear. After all, he had once pulled the clothes of a Han woman like this. But now, he felt that it was ear-piercing. The cloth was finally pulled apart. He tried hard to open his burned eyes, trying to find his injured left arm. However, all he saw was a gray sky. Around him were minced meat, corpses, wood chips, fire, and so on. The smell of death flowed into his body through the tip of his nose. The unpleasant smell made him cough twice. However, these 2 coughs caused him to cough up blood and foam. He could not care less. He turned his head and bit the cloth. His right arm was twisted back and forth. Waves of pain came and he kept howling. Finally, after twisting for a long time, he was done. He clenched his teeth and tried to sit up with his right hand on the ground. However, waves of pain came from his abdomen, making him feel as if he was being torn apart. In the end, he gave up. He could only lie down and glance at the surroundings. With just one glance, he saw death, blood, and sacrifice. The whole camp was razed to the ground. Fire, burning tents, and minced meat were everywhere. He felt a little nauseous. However, there was nothing in his stomach. He could not vomit, so he could only dry heave. Waves of wailing came from not far away. It sounded like the screams of ghosts from hell, but also like the cries of people who were about to die. The whole Sheng prefecture was shrouded in panic. At this moment, the neighs of war horses came. Tuli turned his head and glanced in the direction of the sound. He saw a group of people rushing over. They were the people of various Turkic tribes. Khan, little Khan. The people who came kept shouting. It was as if Tuli heard his savior. With great difficulty, he raised his right arm to signal for help. Those sharp-eyed men and horses quickly realized what was going on. They hastily stepped forward to support Tuli. Little Khan, how are you? The one who spoke was a big man with a full beard. Tuli had an impression of this man. He was his subordinate. Although he was his subordinate, he could not say anything at all. He could only point into the distance. The place he was pointing at was the grassland. This big man was quite smart. He immediately understood Tuli's intention and said, Little Khan, do you mean to return to the prairie immediately? Tuli still didn't say anything. Instead, he nodded slightly in response. The burly man nodded in response. Then, he glanced at the crowd and shouted, Get a group of people to make a stretcher and escort little Khan back to the grasslands. The rest of you, follow me to find Khan. After saying that, he carefully placed Tuli on the ground. After giving him a meaningful glance, he turned around and left. However, from beginning to end, Tuli's arm did not lower, as if he still had something to say, but that big man had already disappeared. A moment later, that big man found Xieli in the same way. Surprisingly, Xieli and Tuli said the same thing. They also wanted to return to the grasslands. Therefore, the uninjured Turkic soldiers made several stretchers and escorted Xieli and Tuli back to the grasslands. At the same time in Shenzhou City, ever since Jin Xing, the provincial governor of Shenzhou, received the news that the Turkic people were coming to the Tang dynasty to plunder, he had been training his troops every day. He knew that he was no match for the Turkic people. Therefore, while training, he asked the imperial court for reinforcements. However, something strange happened. The war had not started yet, but the Turkic people had already started fighting among themselves. To be more precise, the heavenly thunder struck over the Turkic people and a fire broke out overnight. Did they withdraw their troops overnight? Not a single soldier was left behind. This made Jin Xing a little confused. Why would the heavenly thunder strike where the Turkic people were stationed without any reason? Taking a step back, even if there was a heavenly thunder, why didn't these Turkic people know to avoid it? Moreover, the Turkic people claimed to have 200,000 troops this time. No matter how powerful the heavenly thunder was, it was impossible to annihilate 200,000 troops overnight. Strange. Judging from these signs, some of them were strange. They had no reason to give up going south. Did the Turkic people not plan to plunder anymore? That was impossible. Based on his years of experience in guarding Shenzhou, this was simply impossible. First of all, the Turkic people would run out of food in winter. Half of their cattle and sheep would be killed or injured. Moreover, the Turkic people lived by herding. Without cattle and sheep, what would they eat? Moreover, the Turkic people and the Tang dynasty had always been enemies. Going south to plunder seemed to be engraved in their bones and had become a tradition. They would do it every year. It was even more impossible to cancel it this year. All these were true. Could it be that the Turkic people were plotting something? Chapter 1882. The more he thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. Jin Xing glanced at the guard beside him and said, "Wu Pu, immediately count 10,000 troops. I think something is wrong. I have to go personally." Wu Pu frowned. The news of the Turks' withdrawal was checked by his men. He did not believe it at first. He ordered people to check it 5 times before he could confirm it. After telling the general did not believe it even more. He had already sent 5 groups of people to check. Now he wants to check again? He wanted to refuse, but thinking that the general wanted to go personally, he cupped his hands and said, "Yes, General." After that, he turned around and began to select the troops. After a while, the troops were finally counted. Wu Pu cupped his hands and said, "General, the troops have been counted. There are 10,000 people in total. General, please check." Jin Xing turned his head and glanced. Seeing that there was no problem, he waved his hand and said, "Everyone, set off. The destination is the Turks' camp." After that, he mounted his horse and galloped toward the city gate. Wu Pu saw that the general had set off. He did not hesitate and led his men to catch up with Jin Xing. The guard at the gate of Xingzhou City was on duty. Seeing a large group of people rushing over, he wanted to scold them. But when he saw that it was the general, he did not dare to be negligent. He quickly ordered the people to lower the drawbridge. There were no obstacles along the way. Jin Xing led 10,000 people and smoothly arrived at the Turks' camp. Before he even got close, a pungent smell wafted over. Wu Pu covered his nose. His face was a little ugly. "General, what is this smell?" Jin Xing frowned and did not answer immediately. Instead, he squatted on the ground and picked up a handful of red-hot soil to smell it. However, he could not tell what it was. He could only say, "I don't know either. However, this should be the smell of the heavenly lightning you mentioned." After that, he immediately got up and waved his hand, "Everyone, speed up." He now believed that the thunder was real. Otherwise, how could he explain the soil? The soil under his feet was yellow, but now it was red. Without powerful fire, it was difficult to do. The group sped up. After a while, a desolate scene appeared in front of everyone. There were pieces of flesh everywhere. Blood dyed the ground red. Burnt cloth could be seen everywhere, and there were even large words written on it, "Xieli Khan." The sawdust that had not been completely extinguished glowed in the dark night like fireflies in summer. At this moment, they seemed to be cheering for freedom. The broken scimitars and spears were stabbed into the ground in disarray. They seemed to have decayed and were covered with a layer of yellow and white matter. It looked incomparably desolate. Not far away, a few vultures were circling above a few corpses that had not been completely buried. There were many iron scraps on the corpses, but the broken spears were still in the hands of the corpses, as if these spears would take their souls to hell and slaughter them again. There was also a pack of wild wolves that had come to look for food. They were gnawing on a fragmented corpse, and their cold-blooded eyes emitted a dim light. They were like the soul reaper of hell, terrifying and horrifying. Looking at the crowd that was getting closer and closer, the wild wolf became more alert. It put down the pieces of meat in its mouth and opened its bloody mouth, revealing its fangs. "Halt!" Jin Xing waved his right hand and glanced at the wolves and vultures. He said coldly, "Drive the wolves away and form an encirclement. Investigate the situation here." Although the situation now was roughly clear, it still needed to be investigated to prevent the Turks from plotting. As the general of Shang province, everyone's lives were in his hands. He had to be very careful. "Yes, General." Wu Pu cupped his hands. He also knew the importance of the situation. He then turned his head and looked at the soldiers. "Everyone, divide into 8 groups. Clear the east, west, north, south, southeast, southwest, northeast, and northwest respectively. Except for the living, clear everything else out of the encirclement." Everyone accepted the order and quickly dispersed. The quality of the soldiers of Shang province was very good, or it could be said that Jin Xing's tie was very good. In a short moment, they cleared the wild wolves, vultures, and other things and formed an encirclement. In addition, they also gathered all the intact corpses together. They did not dare to deal with them privately, so they could only wait for the general's order. "General, all the corpses have been sorted out. There are about 5,000 people." Wu Pu cupped his hands and lowered his head. He said hesitantly, "I also found traces of the Turks escaping. Should we chase?" Xianxia frowned. His first reaction was to chase and catch all of them in one net. But thinking about it, since the Turks had already escaped, they must have returned to the grassland. He only brought 10,000 people with him. How could he chase? Wouldn't he be courting death if he went up? So he said, "Forget it. Don't chase a cornered enemy. Let's look at the corpses first." After that, he no longer paid attention to Wu Pu and observed the fragmented corpses alone. A cold wind blew. The smell of cooked corpses and the stench of corpses drifted with the wind. He actually had a desolate feeling. Chapter 1883. Now he really believed that the heavenly thunder had descended. If there was no heavenly thunder, how could these corpses be covered in iron shavings? Moreover, there was not a single piece of intact flesh on their bodies. Basically, all of them were burned. Without powerful firepower, there was no way to do this. And the Turks were preparing to go to war with the Tang dynasty. It was impossible for them to go to war privately. Although the Turks usually had internal strife, Xieli was not a fool. He would not do such a thing. As for these corpses, the Turks must have left in a hurry and did not have time to take them away. After confirming his thoughts, he glanced at Wu Pu in front of him. "Burn these scattered corpses." Since the Turks had left, there was no use keeping these corpses. Burn them on the spot to prevent future trouble. Otherwise, once they rotted, it would be another plague. Wu Pu obviously understood this. He cupped his hands and said, "Yes, General." Then he arranged for people to pile the corpses together and found some unburned cloth to wrap them up. With a light of a firework, a huge fire suddenly rose, directly reflecting half of the sky. A gust of cold wind blew. The stench of corpses mixed with wood shavings and the smell of decay floated above the station. It was very pungent. As Xianxia watched the feast, his heart was filled with mixed emotions. He was happy that the Turks did not invade. He also had an account to give to the imperial court. At least Xingzhou was defended. But he was worried about how to write the memorial. Could he write that the Turks were attacked by a heavenly thunder, completely wiped out, and the rest fled back to the grassland? Who would believe such words? Not to mention the emperor, even the officials of the imperial court would not believe it. It was not easy to win the battle, but it became difficult for him to submit the memorial. It was ridiculous. Just as he was immersed in how to deal with the imperial court's question, Wu Pu's voice came from not far away. "General, we found a living person." Hearing this, Xianxia was shocked as if he had found a savior. "There? Where is the person?" If there was a living person, then there was a witness. Think about it. If he reported the situation here, what if no one believed him? Then this witness could play a role. Once the matter was explained, he would be the first meritorious person. Thinking of this, he was naturally overjoyed. With a large stride, he arrived in front of Wu Pu and grabbed his shoulders. "Where is he?" Wu Pu seemed to be in pain, smiling bitterly. "General, why don't you let me go first?" Xianxia finally reacted. He smiled awkwardly and let go of his hand. "Tell me, where is he?" "They've just been discovered. They're still buried in the sand." Wu Pu rolled up his sleeves and waved his hand with a serious expression. "I will bring the general over." With that, Wu Pu turned around and walked away, followed by Xianxia. 2 steps later, a mound of dirt appeared before their eyes. Atop this mound of dirt was a human head. This person's face was covered in metal shavings, and blood was trickling from the corner of his mouth. Even so, one could tell from this person's facial features that this person was a Turkic. This was because the Turks were very different from the people of the Tang dynasty. The former had a high nose bridge and large bones, while the latter had a flat nose bridge, thin bones, and smaller bodies. Since it was confirmed that this person was a Turkic, Xianxia did not dare to hesitate for fear that this guy would die. He hurriedly said, Quickly dig this person out. After that, he seemed to feel that something was wrong, so he added, don't kill him. Later, we'll need to get information from him. Now, this guy was the only surviving Turkic, which was of great significance to him. Not only could he be a witness, but more importantly, he could get some information about the Turks from him. Of course, this was all after he was rescued. However, the soldiers didn't think so. They glared coldly at the Turk, wishing they could skin him alive right now. One must know that the Turkic and the Tang dynasty had always been mortal enemies. Almost every year, the Turkic would go south to pillage. As long as one was a person of the Tang dynasty, who would not hate these beasts to the bone. Not to mention these soldiers. Some of their fathers were killed by the Turkic, some of their sons were killed by the Turkic, and even more tragically, their entire families were killed by the Turkic. It was because of these reasons that they joined the army. Now, they were actually asked to save a Turkic? How was this possible? Everyone was a little unconvinced. Soon, someone stood up and said, General, you can ask me to kill the Turkic, but it's impossible to save him. That's right. These beasts killed my father. I can't wait to kill him now. More and more people began to shout. They raised their right arms high, and their eyes were bloodshot. Xianxia had already expected such a situation. Who here did not have a deep grudge against the Turks? However, personal hatred was greater than national hatred. Only by saving the Turkic could they better understand the situation. After thinking for a while, he said earnestly, I know what everyone is thinking. It's nothing more than killing this Turkic to vent your hatred, right? Yes. Chapter 1884. Everyone answered in unison. Their voices seemed to be able to break the sky. But have you ever thought about it? What's the point of killing a Turk? Will the Turks not come after you kill him? Xianxia glanced at everyone and said indifferently, right now, the most important thing for us is to figure out what happened. Also, we need to understand the Turks' way of life so that we can take revenge in the future. Right now, this Turk is our best tool. If you kill him, how are we going to get information? Everyone was speechless. Some lowered their heads, some stared at the Turk, but no one spoke. Because they all knew that what the general said made sense. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy could you win 100 battles. It was indeed inappropriate to kill this Turk rashly before they figured out the situation. Moreover, this Turk might have some important information. Once they got it, it would be beneficial to the Tang dynasty. Although they all understood the reason, they did not stand up because their hatred for the Turks had been deeply rooted in their bones. It was impossible for them to pull it out, let alone take the initiative to save a Turk. Xianxia seemed to see through them and did not care about their rudeness. He just smiled and said, since everyone has no problem, let's start. It's fine as long as he doesn't die. He knew that they were unwilling to lower their heads. Since his subordinates were unwilling to lower their heads, he, as the general, naturally had to give them a way out. Moreover, his words were very vague. It was fine as long as he didn't die. The implication was that as long as he didn't die, they could do whatever they wanted. Everyone looked at each other. Obviously, they understood. They nodded and then began to dig the soil with their swords and knives. After digging for a while, the Turk's upper body was exposed. Give him some water. Wu Pu glanced at the crowd with a serious face. Only then did the soldiers react. They picked up the water bag and poured it into the Turk. Maybe these guys wanted revenge, or maybe they really wanted to kill this Turk. Perhaps it was because the Turk had choked on the water or because he had regained his vitality. He slowly opened his eyes and scanned the crowd before him. Suddenly, he shuddered and began to mutter something under his breath. However, his voice was too soft, so it was hard to make out what he was saying. However, Xianxia did not have time to care about this now. He hurriedly said, "Continue to dig. Use your hands." He was afraid that if he continued to use swords and knives, he would hurt this guy. What if he suddenly died? It was safer to use his hands. Everyone nodded, threw away the swords in their hands, and really started digging with their hands. However, as they dug, they were still cursing something. "Turk dog, don't die so quickly. Lao Tzu still wants your life. After he tells us what happened just now, Lao Tzu wants to pry open his head and see what's in his head." Cursing was cursing, but this was just a way to vent. Who wouldn't hate an enemy in front of them? Not to mention these hot-blooded soldiers. Their hands and feet never stopped moving. After all, if they wanted to kill him, they had to wait until he came out. After a while, the Turk's lower body was finally dug out. His left leg was long gone, and there was a piece of wood as thick as a forearm stuck in his right leg. It looked like a flagpole. Blood flowed down the wound and dyed the yellow ground red. It looked a bit horrifying. Military doctor? Where's the military doctor? Xianxia turned around and shouted behind him. This guy's life was in danger. If he wasn't treated, he would be gone. As his voice spread, an old man carrying a medicine box slowly walked forward. General, I'm here. Xianxia glanced at the person and then pointed at the Turk on the ground. Treat this guy immediately. At the very least, he has to be able to speak. He has important information on him. The military doctor looked in the direction Xianxia was pointing at and frowned. How could it be a Turk? The old man was a military doctor. How could he treat a Turk? How many people did the Turks kill in Xianxia back then? His biological parents died tragically in the hands of these bastards. Now, he was actually asking him to treat a Turk? Thinking of this, he didn't know where he got the strength. He suddenly straightened his back and said sternly, General, please find someone else. This old man's medical skills are not good. I'm afraid I can't treat this person. After that, he glanced at the Turk on the ground with an inexplicable disgust. In fact, his words were already very tactful. It was up to the general to understand. Xianxia smiled. How could he not know that this old fox was making excuses? He still put on a serious look. Dr. Wang, I know you have a deep hatred for the Turks. However, this Turk in front of us is very important to our army. He has very important information. As long as we treat him, we can know what happened just now. Maybe we can even know important information about the Turks. Think about it carefully. This, Physician Wang stroked his beard and shifted his gaze back to the Turk. Chapter 1885. In fact, he also knew a little about what happened just now. He heard that the heavenly thunder killed many Turks. However, he didn't see it with his own eyes, so he found it hard to believe. According to the general, the Turk in front of him seemed to be the only survivor after the disaster. If he cured this person, he might really get something about the heavenly thunder. This will only be beneficial to my great Tang, and there will be no harm. At most, he would give this dog a dose of medicine to kill him. After making up his mind, he looked at Xianxia and sighed. Well, old man, let's save this dog. After that, he patted the medicine box and walked toward the Turk. However, he seemed to think of something and added, General, you have to promise the old man that when this guy is no longer valuable, let the old man poke 100 holes in him. This sudden valiance stunned Xianxia. He didn't expect that Dr. Wang, who usually didn't show his strength, had this side. However, on second thought, who hadn't been young before. So he said, Don't worry. As long as you don't kill him, you can even give him to your family for breeding. As soon as this was said, the people around couldn't help but laugh. Haha. The general really knows how to make fun of Dr. Wang. Everyone laughed as if they were laughing at the Turk for being a pig. Dr. Wang didn't care about the ridicule of the crowd. He just thought that they were laughing at the Turk, but he was still dissatisfied. He thought to himself, breeding this thing for a pig? Even a pig would despise it. After the laughter subsided, Dr. Wang began to treat the Turk's injuries seriously. He took her pulse and fed her medicine. In any case, he did all sorts of things. However, no one knew what medicine the old man gave him. After all, no one present knew medicine. After about a quarter of an hour, the Turk finally woke up. He opened his blood-red eyes and looked into the distance. His hand was half raised and his mouth was muttering something. Xianxia frowned and was a little dissatisfied. King, speak louder. As soon as his voice fell, he felt something was wrong. It seemed that he hadn't asked, so he said, What's your name? What happened just now? It was unknown whether the Turk didn't understand or was deliberately not replying. He turned his head and slowly lowered his hand, pretending to be a dead dog. Wu Pu couldn't stand it anymore and scolded him, Why the F***ck are you pretending? How dare you not answer the general's question? Do you think you're some big shot? Come on, beat him. Hearing this, the onlookers immediately picked up their weapons, eager to give it a try. They had long wanted to tear this guy to shreds. Xianxia did not dare to let these guys hit him. It was not easy to save him. What if he was beaten to death? Besides, these fellows didn't even know how to control their strength. Not to mention hitting, even a light touch might be fatal. Wait. Xianxia stopped Wu Pu and hurriedly said, "Don't fight first, let me ask." After saying those words, he turned to the Turk and said patiently, "Hurry up and tell me your name. What happened just now? Otherwise, a punishment worse than death awaits you later." He dared to guarantee that as long as he said a word, as long as he didn't kill this Turk, they could do whatever they wanted with him. These subordinates definitely had 100 ways to make this guy suffer a fate worse than death. It was just a matter of whether this guy was willing to talk or not. However, this Turk seemed to be very stubborn. He glared at Xianxia but was unwilling to speak. Then there was no other way. Xianxia glanced at the crowd and said, "I'll leave the rest to you. My only request is that you don't kill him. It's fine as long as he can talk." As soon as he said those words, everyone cheered as if they had received a great reward. "Thank you, General. The General is mighty. I'll definitely let him know what mercury immersion is, hee." After saying those words, the crowd swarmed toward the Turk. In a moment, screams came from the crowd. Listening carefully, there were not only the Turk but also many soldiers. Xianxia couldn't be bothered. After all, it was impossible for so many people to not be able to do anything to a Turk. The screams came from some fellow accidentally injuring his companions. Such situations happened often, so there was nothing strange about it. About half an hour later, the screams finally stopped. A shirtless man ran to Xianxia excitedly and said, "General, this dog is willing to talk." "Huh?" Xianxia looked at the shirtless man in front of him and was a little puzzled. What kind of method did he use? He was willing to talk in less than half an hour? Lao Tzu estimated that it would take half an hour. After all, this dog was quite stubborn. Forget it, he didn't want to think about it. He shook his head and said, "Let's go and take a look." After saying that, he waved his sleeves and walked toward the crowd. The soldiers were also very tactful. When they saw the general coming, they all made way. However, what the hell was with these guys all topless? Some of them were even naked. What was going on? Chapter 1886. What was more infuriating was that these guys didn't seem to feel ashamed. Instead, they looked satisfied. Instantly, he felt unwell all over. Did these guys have special fetishes? He didn't dare to think about it and quickened his pace. The Turk was half lying on the ground. He was also naked. Tears were still flowing from his eyes as if he had suffered a great grievance. Cough, cough. Xianxia deliberately coughed twice and glanced at the Turk. "Are you willing to talk now?" He purposely ignored these soldiers so that he wouldn't embarrass himself later. Unexpectedly, this Turk seemed to have changed into a different person. When he saw Xianxia, it was as if he had seen his savior. He wiped his tears and sobbed. "General, your soldiers are not human. Cut the crap. Hurry up and talk." Xianxia's face darkened. He was a little impatient. He naturally didn't want to listen to others talk about his soldiers, especially a Turk. However, what did these guys do to make people angry? Why did they make a Turk who was originally very strong-willed become like this? It seemed that he had to teach these guys a lesson when he went back. Otherwise, Sheng's state would be in chaos. Thinking of this, he glanced at the people around him and pretended to be angry. However, these guys didn't seem to see it. They stared at the Turk and kept laughing. At this moment, the Turk spoke. "General, I was an archer under Sheli Khan. Just now, a shadow appeared in the sky. That guy directly covered the moon." "Covered the moon?" Xianxia couldn't help but interrupt. He was a little suspicious of what the Turk said. What kind of thing could go to the sky? Damn it, cover the moon? How was this possible? However, a few days ago, news came from Tang, and that the vengeful spirit of the Xuanwu Gate had come to the world, which also covered the sun. Even His Majesty was ready to issue an edict of punishment. Now, in comparison, it seemed that the two had some similarities. It seemed to be possible. Therefore, he said, "Continue." The Turk didn't seem to be angry because of Jin Xing's interruption. Instead, he was very happy because he really didn't want to fall into the hands of this group of soldiers. Damn it, they were not human. He'd actually sigh, forget it, I'll just endure it. Thus, he continued, General, that thing floated in the air for a while. It was fine at first, but then it stopped in Khan Xieli's tent. We thought it was the celestial wolf god, so we cheered. Khan Xieli also thought it was the celestial wolf god, so he sent wizards to divine, but halfway through, at this point, tears actually fell from the corners of his eyes. Because he thought of his family. His eldest brother and second brother had been blasted into minced meat just now. He had seen all of this with his own eyes, but he had no way to stop it. He hated it. He hated himself and hated the thing in the sky. There was even a hint of hatred for Khan Xieli. If not for Xieli Khan, no, Xieli, if not for Xieli, perhaps his brothers would not have died. It was Xieli who wanted to go south. If he had not gone south, perhaps nothing would have happened. This was the heavenly wolf deity's punishment for the grasslands. Human emotions were changeable and unpredictable. Once a disaster happened, they would often push the blame onto others. Human emotions were also interconnected. Everyone was born selfish. They often liked to take other people's things for themselves. The more power one had, the more obsessed they were with this nature. But the funny thing was that such selfish people often cared more about their blood relatives. Just like the Turk in front of him. He was thinking about how to go south and plunder, and how to climb higher. His blood relatives were dispensable to him. Because the grasslands were a place where only strength mattered. As long as you had strength, you would be in charge, you would be king. But once you lost your strength, millions of people would come to enslave you, millions of people would come to trample on you, millions of people would come to kill you. He had understood these principles since birth, and now it had been engraved into his bones. So, facing Jin Xing's interrogation, he could be considered to be feigning civility. Jin Xing did not know these. Seeing that the Turk in front of him was crying, he thought this guy had been abused. After all, he did not have a good impression of the Turk. So, he continued, "Don't stop, continue." The Turk nodded, wiped his tears, and continued. When the shaman was halfway through the divination, he suddenly found sparks falling from the sky, and there was more than one person. There were many. Everyone was cheering, and the shaman became even crazier, thinking that this was the wealth sent by the heavenly wolf deity. In the end, these sparks suddenly exploded, and everyone was injured. It seemed that many people died. In a daze, I heard that someone had retreated. Retreated? Jin Xing was not surprised by this news. He had heard it once just now. This time, he just wanted to confirm it. Xieli had suffered so many casualties this time, it was impossible not to retreat. However, Xieli's life was a big matter. So, he asked again, what about Xieli and Tuli? Did they die? Chapter 1887. Khan Xieli. Speaking of this, the Turk seemed to realize something was wrong and hurriedly corrected himself. When I was in a coma just now, I vaguely heard Xieli's voice and little Khan Tuli's voice. They seemed to have withdrawn together. Jin Xing held his chin with his hand and smiled. He felt that this Turk was a bit interesting. Just now he called Xieli Khan. Why did he suddenly call him Xieli? Also, why did this guy only call Xieli by his real name and still be very respectful to Tuli? Did he want to please him? But that was impossible. The Tang dynasty and the Turks were feuds. Even if he wanted to please him, he would not let him go. What was this guy thinking? No, he had to ask. So, he said again, why did you call Xieli by his real name? Isn't he your Khan? Also, since you already called Xieli by his real name, why did you call Tuli little Khan? The Turk seemed to dislike this topic. He glanced at Jin Xing and was a little angry, but soon flashed away. After all, he was under the eaves and had to lower his head. So, he said, if it weren't for Xieli, how could I have one of my legs blown off? How could my two brothers die? So, do you understand? Jin Xing nodded as if he did not fully understand. It seemed like this guy had placed all the blame for the heavenly thunder on Xieli, which could also be considered a good thing. Perhaps he could make use of it in the future. After a short pause, he asked again, then why did you call Tuli little Khan? Little Khan Tuli is different from Xieli. The Turk raised his head, and a smug look flashed in his eyes. Little Khan Tuli is the son of the previous Khan, and he was originally the successor. It was only because he was too young that he was taken away by Xieli. If Little Khan can lead the grassland, we will definitely fight our way into the Tang Empire. Speaking of this, he seemed to realize something and quickly corrected himself. No, I mean it was not Little Khan Tuli's idea to come to the Tang dynasty this time. He even opposed it a little. Jin Xing raised his eyebrows. Unexpectedly, there was an unexpected gain. Tuli opposed to coming to the Tang dynasty to plunder. Could it be that this guy wanted to show goodwill to the Tang dynasty? Thinking of this, he quickly asked, why did Tuli oppose it? The Turk frowned, clearly thinking about something. After a while, he said, I don't know. He wasn't wrong. He really didn't know. As for why Tuli opposed the abduction of the Tang dynasty, the fundamental reason was that he did not want Xieli to grow bigger and bigger. Because Tuli was wholeheartedly thinking about how to succeed the Khan's position. If this time Xieli succeeded in the abduction, his prestige would be even greater. How could he still play around? How could a mounted archer like him know about such matters? Jin Xing didn't blame him. After all, this was no small matter. He said, forget it, let's leave it at that. After that, he glanced at Wu Pu behind him and said seriously, take this guy back. Remember, lock him up alone. No one is allowed to get close. As he spoke, he intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the shirtless soldiers around him. These fellows had tormented this Turk to the brink of death. If he were to fall into the hands of these fellows, he would most likely die. The soldiers didn't seem to care about the general's gaze, because they felt that they had done a good deed. Wu Pu looked solemn. Yes, General. After that, he waved his hand and shouted, go back to the city. Jin Xing wasn't in the mood to care about these trivial matters. He jumped on the horse and rushed to Xingzhou City. Everyone tidied up, extinguished the bonfire, and prepared to go back to the city with the Turk. The next day, the sky was already bright. A group of soldiers riding tall horses galloped on a country road. They were dusty, their faces were full of dust, and their lips were dry and cracked, as if they were about to faint. However, their strong military consciousness still made them struggle. They held the reins tightly and didn't want to give up. However, horses were different from people. They didn't have strong willpower. After a long journey, many of them began to foam at the mouth, as if they would fall to the ground at any time. Finally, a horse seemed to be unable to hold on. Its front hooves were stuck in the pothole. Its body suddenly leaned forward and fell heavily to the ground. Its whole body twitched, and at the same time, the soldier on it was thrown to the ground. The soldier was completely unprepared for this sudden turn of events. He rolled to the ground and fell unconscious. Of course, the matter was far from over. The collapse of the first horse immediately affected the second and the third. Soon, a large number of horses behind him lost their front hooves and fell to the ground one after another. They foamed at the mouth and panted heavily, as if they were struggling for their lives. The soldier in front heard the sound and immediately reined in his horse. He glanced back and then turned pale. He shouted to the front, "General, something happened in the rear." The leader was Li Jing. He was ordered by the emperor to search for Zhang Feng. He rushed all the way and didn't dare to neglect. He didn't even rest on the way. He was about to reach Xingzhou, but now something happened? How could he not be anxious?